Harry Potter, Dimensional Wizard. Chapter 226, The Two Books. Jonathan was in a corner vomiting his stomach out into the sand. Meanwhile, Evelyn looked excited. Did we just fly in the sky? Without an airplane or anything else? Flying like a free bird? Rick held his gun tightly as he nodded his head. He tried really hard to keep his composure as he muttered, first there was Mummy, then wizards, and now flying in the sky. What happened to the world? We need to hurry. It won't be long before Imhotep killed the remaining Americans and learned of Evelyn's disappearance and tried to catch up to us. We need to find the Book of Amun-Ra as soon as possible. Do you have a map of the tomb? Yes, replied Snape as he waved his hand to display a map. The book should be under Horus status. Immediately, Snape led the group to the location of the status. How do you know the location of the book? Asked Evelyn. She had to use a lot of effort to deduce the location, yet the mysterious person that just showed up seemed to know everything. I just do, replied Edward calmly. Soon, the group reached the foot of Horus status. With their wand, they were able to pry open the compartment where they found a golden book. Edward took the book and looked at it with interest. Snape, Lily, and Hermione were also immediately interested. We need the key to open it, and Imhotep has it in his hand, said Evie. No need, replied Edward. He used his wand to take measures of the dimension of the keyhole on the book, then waved his hand at the sand on the floor. He used transfiguration to turn the sand into a key with the exact dimensions of the key holder. Placing this newly created key on the book and twisted, the book opened. FENL. We should have tried to see if the Alohomora would have worked on the book, suggested Lily. We can still do that later. Okay, magic is convenient, commented Jonathan on the side. Have you felt it? Asked Edward. Yes, nodded the three of them. Felt what? Asked Evie. The book itself contained power, replied Lily. What does that mean? Magic is itself does not completely escape the law of conservation of energy. To cast a spell of any kind, a power source or energy is required. So, ordinary people cannot use magic. However, this book contained energy itself and can be used as a tool to cast spells. So, anyone that has it in their hands and read the incantations can use spells. Evie nodded her head as this explained how she was able to revive Imhotep after reading the incantations in the Book of the Dead. Suddenly, she noticed that they were engrossed in reading the book. Do all four of you understand ancient Egyptians? Unfortunately, the four of them were too engrossed to even hear her. A few minutes later, they were done. Interesting, muttered Edward. This book contained countless spells or curses to take away a person's life. Although the book is referred to as the Book of the Living, it only contains how to take away mortal lives. That means that the Book of the Dead contained many spells on how to save and resurrect people, said Edward as his eyes flashed with desire. With these two books, he knew that he will have a great understanding of death magic, healing magic, and the soul. Alright, let's prepare for Imhotep's arrival. What are we going to do with him? Send him to the underworld, asked Snape. Don't say something stupid, replied Lily. With the golden book, we can weaken and capture him, then study his body to unravel the secret of the dead from him. Lily's right, he's the perfect experimental material, replied Edward. That's dangerous, we should just use the book to send him back to the underworld, said Evelyn. I'm with her on this thing is too dangerous, if we can deal with it permanently, then it's best, said O'Connell. Don't worry, as long as we get the Book of Death from Imhotep, then he will not be a problem. I don't think so, as Rick raised his gun and pointed at the group. I know you guys are powerful and can use my magic and all, but I cannot allow you to risk the life of the entire world for your selfish gain. Edward looked at him in the eyes, and O'Connell suddenly felt dizzy. He wanted to pull the trigger but he felt weak and fell to the ground. Rick, yelled Evie as she ran to his side to check if he was all right. Edward snapped his finger and she and her brother passed out on the floor. What do we do with them now? Asked Snape. It would be a shame to kill the girl since her soul seems special. There is no need to kill them, said Hermione. She's right, replied Edward. Plus, this girl is the reincarnation of an Egyptian princess. Both her and O'Connell have involvement with the gods of this world, so it's best to not harm them until our strength is restored. This world has gods? Asked Lily. Everyone was a little surprised by this news. Then, Edward explained to them the future he saw and his theory regarding Anubis and Osiris. In that case, we need to be more serious when doing things, said Snape with a serious look on his face. Let's go and deal with the mummy. A few hours later, Imhotep appeared in the main chamber of the tomb where he saw the four of them waiting for him. It's all of you, the users of forbidden sorcery, said Imhotep in ancient Egyptian. Forbidden sorcery? What is that? Asked Edward back in perfect ancient Egyptian, an act which slightly surprised the mummy. You're using it and yet asking me about it. Honestly, we were just lucky to discover a book with knowledge about what you called forbidden sorcery, and after years of studying, we managed to accomplish something. How about you tell us a little more about it, said Edward. However, Imhotep did not respond and said a few words, then four tall mummies with shields and spears appeared in front of him, waiting for his command. How about a deal, said Edward as he waved his hand and Evelyn appeared in front of him. You tell us about forbidden sorcery and I will hand the girl over to you. Finally, you can reunite with your beloved Anksunaman. Imhotep looked at Evelyn on the floor before looking at the group, he then said. I've only read about forbidden sorcery from books during my days in training as a priest. According to records, forbidden sorcery comes from within certain individuals who are born with that power. However, for some reasons, the gods banished this kind of sorcery and eliminated all who were gifted with it. They destroyed all knowledge related to it. Edward frowned as this was never mentioned in the movie. However, he did not dwell on this issue as he knew that the real world was more complicated and a 2 hours movie could not explore all aspects of it. What about your sorcery? Does it not come from within? My power came from the great god Anubis, replied Imhotep. Now that I've told you everything I know, give the girl to me. As you wish. He waved his hand and Evelyn flew towards Imhotep, who raised his hand to catch her. However, right as he was about to succeed, Snape used the Accio charm to call the black book that was in his hand. Meanwhile, the golden book appeared in Lily's hand and she read an incantation from it. Imhotep looked at Evelyn in his hand who turned into sand since it was a very well-made transfiguration. Rage suddenly overcame him, however, before he could make another move, he heard the sound of the incantation and felt his body weaken. Then, Imhotep passed out. Chapter 227, Ziyuan. Looking at the Book of the Dead and the Book of Amun-Re, Edward was very happy. So far, with the Tears of the Moon and these two books, his voyage to this world is more than satisfactory. Not to mention that there are still many things he can acquire in this world, and at very low risk. Although he still has to be wary of the gods, however, since they have not directly shown up now, it might mean that there was a problem with them preventing them from doing so. Alright, you two can bring the book and Imhotep back to the floating city, said Edward towards Lily and Snape. What are we going to do? Asked Hermione. We need to handle this group of people, replied Edward as he pointed to the past Evely and O'Connell. Having a good relationship with them can help us in our future actions. The movie Mummy too involved the bracelet of Anubis. Although Edward could find it beforehand, this bracelet seemed to have the ability to choose its owner and it chose Evelyn and Rick's son, Alex. Of course, even without the bracelet, Edward could find the Ahm Shear, which is the location of the tomb of the Scorpion King. However, as he already suspected that the second movie is a battle between Osiris and his son Anubis, he did not want to intervene. He wanted to observe things from the shadow. Edward had developed a theory after meeting Imhotep, but he did not have enough evidence. So, he wanted to confirm whether it was true during the second movie. The only problem is that this takes place more than 8 years from now since Alex was not even conceived yet let alone born. Nevertheless, this was not a big problem as the time will give him and his group time to recover and do many experiments. He used his wand to wake up the three. What's going on? Said Rick who was on alert as he held his gun in his hand. He then looked at Edward with vigilance. Where is Imhotep? The mummy has been dealt with and the curse on Egypt has been lifted, said Edward. After Imhotep passed out, his power was stripped from him using the Book of Amun-Re, so the curses on the country were lifted. However, we should not remain here for long as the tomb will soon be destroyed. EOE. The 5 of them rushed out of Hamuntra as the tomb rapidly collapsed. After they left, everyone felt relieved. However, Rick was still pouting and had a look of distrust of Edward. Hermione, who received a heads-up beforehand, began to talk to Evelyn to smooth out the awkwardness of the previous situation. I know that you guys may not need it but I thought it would be best to share some of it. As he said that, he took out a small bag and dumped it out. Then, countless treasures were dumped out from that small bag. And from the amount, it seems endless. Jonathan's eyes suddenly lit up as he rushed to the treasure. For us, he asked. Half of it. Since we both participated in this expedition, I did not think it would be alright to take all the treasures given all the effort you guys made, replied Edward. In that case, everything is forgiven, said Jonathan as he started to play with the jewels and gold. Edward separated the treasure into 2 and placed each half in a different bag. He made sure to place the scepter that is really the spear of Osiris in the group's bag before handing it to them. This bag can only open once and will become useless. So, after finding a safe location, dumped all of it. Jonathan was a little sad as he previously thought that he would have a magical bag that he could use to carry many things. It's a shame that it could only be used once. However, thinking about all the treasure he has now, he did not mind. After that, the group separated. Are we returning to the city to begin our experiment? Asked Hermione. No, we will be hunting down the pool of eternal life. Where do we begin? We have to go to China and get the Eye of Shangri-La. Edward did not need to wait for more than 20 years when the third Mummy movie began to seek out the benefit, he could do it now. After that, the two apparat to China in search of the jewel called the Eye of Shangri-La. From his memories, Edward knew that the diamond was smuggled out of China by British intelligence in 1940, and now, it was 1926 so it was still there. He wanted to use divination to find its location but the diamond seemed protected against such a method. So, he had to use it the hard way. After more than a month chasing rumors, gathering information and reading people's minds, he finally discovered it in the private collection of a wealthy Chinese widow. After borrowing it, he flew straight to a stupa in the Himalayas. On top of a monument, he placed the diamond that showed the exact location of Shangri-La where the sorceress Zi Yuan and his daughter Lin lived. As soon as he arrived at his destination, he was attacked by a fireball. Luckily, he was on guard and used a shield to protect himself. Then, he saw the beautiful Zi Yuan, her daughter, and 3 white creatures known as Yeti waiting for them. "Is this the power of the 5 elements?" muttered Edward as he felt the power of the spell just now. In the Mummy 3 movie, the Dragon Emperor is said to be a master of mysticism and has control over the Chinese 5 elements: earth, water, wood, metal, and fire. As a sorceress that has lived for more than 2,000 years, Zi Yuan was also a very powerful magic user. And, in the movie, only the Dragon Emperor used the power of the 5 elements. Even though it is stated that Zi Yuan was a powerful sorceress, she only used magic once in the entire movie to summon the dead and mostly fought with a sword. So, it does not make sense for her not to know magic or use it, so I will change this for the FIC. "Please, we have come in peace," said Edward in Mandarin. "Outsiders, you're not welcome here," said Zi Yuan. "We are just here to communicate and exchange knowledge," reiterated Edward. He was not lying as he was very interested in the Oracle Bones, which is a book in Zi Yuan's possession that contained all the spells of the ancient world. In Order World, this book contained spells from different languages, regions, cultures, and ethnicity of this world. With it, Edward can quickly gain some understanding of the magic system of this world. Plus, he was very interested in who created this book. "Since you do not hear my warning, then all of you can stay here." Countless swords suddenly flew over and floated in front of Zi Yuan. "Is this the power of the metal in the 5 elements?" muttered Hermione. It looked like magnetism. Immediately, she decided to execute the plan that she and Edward had made through mind communication to quickly end this fight. She apparat behind Lin and used a stunning charm to knock her out, then she proceeded to do the same to the Yetis. However, these guys seemed to have high magic immunity, so Hermione had to attack them a few times before knocking them out. Meanwhile, Edward did the same to Zi Yuan. Once her swords rushed towards him, he apparat behind her and attacked. However, she seemed to be well versed in battle and did a somersault to evade the attack. However, before she landed, Edward mobilized the aura inside his body and rushed to her side, catching her by surprise with his physical skill beyond the limit of ordinary people. An ice shield appeared around Zi Yuan to protect her, but Edward's hand pierced through as he hit her pressure point, making her immobile. Chapter 228, This World's Magic System. "We could have a proper exchange, why the need for violence?" said Edward as he looked at the frozen Zi Yuan. He had to admit, she was truly a beautiful woman. It's a shame that this woman was dedicated to her husband even after 2,000 years, otherwise, he would have shot his shot. He pointed his wand at her head and said, "Legilimens." Edward began to review her memories so that he could find the location of the Oracle Bones. However, not long after he began, he saw an empty with the sound of Sanskrit constantly chanting. No matter what he did, this was the only thing he could find in her mind. Is this a spell in the Oracle Bones? From his memories, he knew that Zi Yuan knew Sanskrit and used it to cast an immortal curse on the Dragon Emperor and his army, turning them into terracotta army. Most likely, she learned a spell from that book in Sanskrit that protected her mind. And after more than 2,000 years of study, she should have accomplished something. Removing his wand from Zi Yuan's head, Edward headed to Lin, who was passed on the floor, and tried to read her memories. Just like her mother, she did have a spell to protect her mind. However, she did not seem as adept as her mother despite living for as long as she. Additionally, she was passed out, thus decreasing her resistance. After a few minutes of searching, Edward found what he was looking for. In a secret compartment, he found many books with the Oracle Bones in the middle. Are those the books on the monastery of Turfan? In the movie, Zi Yuan told the emperor that she did not have the secret of immortality but knew of a place that did, and that was the monastery of Turfan. There, she discovered the Oracle Bones and used them to grant the emperor immortality through a powerful curse. Edward was planning on visiting that place, but now it seemed that it was not needed as Zi Yuan most likely moved all the books inside here. Ignoring the other books, he opened the oracle and began to read it. This book contained many spells, but they were in different languages from all over the world, from different civilizations that once existed on Earth. Ancient Chinese, Egyptian, Sanskrit, Ancient Greek, Sumerian language, Mesopotamian language, and many more. Some of the spells in this book are from tribes that existed in the BCE time, so these languages are almost extinct. Luckily, these languages are the same back on Earth, so there is a database in the Empire with all these languages. Archaeologists in the Empire can request to use the time record spell to recreate certain events back in time to learn or recreate these ancients' language. As for the ones that this spell could not be used for, as long as a small part of it is discovered, with a supercomputer, it is no problem to deduce the remaining language. Additionally, there are language spells to translate all languages, however, sometimes, this method seemed to fail when it comes to some particular languages. So, Edward can translate more than 90% of this book. As for the remaining 10%, he has to wait for Morgana to return to full capacity before translating them. So, he began to read the book and translate it. During the process, he would chant the incantation on the book to try the spell, thus slowly gaining a basic understanding of this universe's magic system. So, this world's magic system is a combination of warlock and cleric from D&D, Marvel sorcerers, and the Dragon Prince's magic. Like the warlocks and clerics, from Dungeons and Dragons, the sorcerers in this world have to borrow the power of gods or other mystical entities. By using these entities' names, ceremonies, and even contracts, people can borrow these people's power to cast spells. An example of this is Imhotep. As a priest and believer of Anubis, all his powers came from the latter. This is the reason that Anubis was able to take away his power and turned him into a mortal in the second movie. This kind of magic is similar to sorcerers in the Marvel universe. Although this thing was only briefly mentioned in the movies, in the comics, this is a common thing. As for the Dragon Prince's magic, it came from 6 sources: the sun, moon, sky, earth, ocean, and the stars. This world followed a similar system. For example, the Dragon Emperor mastered the 5 elements. The fire element came from the sun, the earth element came from the ground, mountains, and many more. The water element came from the ocean, the wood element came from forests, while the metal element came both from ores in the ground and from the magnetic field that surrounds the planet. Another example is the chief of the Piku Maikuna tribe that cursed Frank and Aguirre. His magic came from the forest where their tribe lived. In conclusion, the people of this universe can borrow power from gods, mystical entities, and nature to cast their spells. Of course, this was not the end. In the Oracle Bones, he found what Imhotep referred to as forbidden sorcerer. According to the book, this is a form of magic that does not rely on the outside but rely on power that comes from the inside. And only a few people have the talent to awake and use this magic. After reading that passage, Edward knew that the so-called forbidden sorcerers were people in this universe who were born with mana inside their bodies and can use it to cast spells. The fact that the gods banned this kind of magic showed that they wanted to control the supernatural element of this world, not giving people the opportunity to be self-reliant. However, Edward did not focus on this aspect as he was excited about this universe's magic system. Gate alchemy allowed people to control all kinds of different energy, solar energy, lunar energy, earth energy, and so on. However, its weakness is that it does not bring the specific characteristic of these energies as they are mainly used to power up basic transmutation. Unless such energy is completely studied like life energy of alchemy that is used for healing, they have no individual abilities or characteristics. Now, things will be different. By studying this universe's magic system, he can use gate alchemy to use different energy to cast all kinds of spells. Solar energy for fire spells, lunar energy for healing and curse removal, ocean energy for water spells, forest energy for plant-related spells, and so many more. Plus, there is a new energy that Edward discovered from this book. The main theme of both this universe seemed to be the undead. Whether it was Frank and Aguirre, all the mummies, or the Terracotta Army, they are all undead. Both the Book of the Dead, the Book of Amun-Re, and the Oracle Bones have many spells related to the undead. To cast any necromancy spells from these books to bring people to life or create undead, the power of Anubis or an eastern god named King Yama needs to be used. In the process of casting these spells, Edward discovered new energy that he called negative energy, or Inchi for the eastern name. Using negative energy seemed very effective for necromancy-related spells. Edward sighed once he was done reading the book. He was quite excited about the outcome. With these new applications of energy, the class of arcanists that he created will truly become versatile. From now on, even if arcanists do not have access to their mana, they can cast spells with all kinds of different energy in the surrounding. That way, they can adapt to any situation and will not become useless without their mana. One day when they travel to universes where magic is non-existent, they can still use the energies of that world to have extraordinary powers. So, you're finally awake. Edward looked at his surroundings as he saw many places in his surroundings were destroyed, and traces of elemental powers could be found on the ground. More importantly, a bunch of dead bodies were on the floor. Obviously, he had summoned them. How long has it been? A week, replied Hermione. Suddenly, Edward felt a powerful hunger and fatigue overcoming him. Without his large mana pool and aura, without drinking any potions, spending a week focused on reading and casting spells began to take a toll on him. I need some rest, muttered Edward. How is the situation over there? I've managed to calm down the mother and daughter and explained a few things to them. We even made a deal. All right, you can tell me later after I rest, said Edward as he yawned. Chapter 229, The Pool of Eternal Life. 2 days later, Edward woke up from his sleep, fully refreshed and his mind clear and readied. He drank a potion to satiate his hunger and provided enough nutrients for his body. Once that was done, he finally rendezvoused with Hermione and Ziyuan. The 4 of them were finally having a normal conversation. I apologized for the way I treated you and your daughter in your own home, said Edward. It was us that acted a little too rash. Your wife has explained the situation to us, replied Ziyuan calmly and elegantly. I know that many people have come here with nefarious motives, so I understand your reaction, replied Edward. Now that the misunderstanding has been cleared, let's discuss the situation. He then looked at Hermione to explain. I told Ziyuan that we would help her deal with the Dragon Emperor and make sure that he is no longer a problem. Edward pondered for a moment. The easiest way is to use the Eye of Shangri-La and resurrect him. Then, the moment he comes back alive, we pierced his heart with a cursed dagger and instantly killed him. That seems a little too dangerous, said Ziyuan. No really. Before reviving him, we can enchant a room with many magic spells to ensure that nothing goes wrong. That sounds too dangerous, said Lin. Yes, we would like a safer solution, added her mother. Edward pondered for a while. According to the Mummy 3 movie, this was the tactic that Lin used to try to kill the Dragon Emperor. After Alex O'Connell excavated the tomb, she immediately attacked it with the only cursed dagger capable of killing him. Unfortunately, this coffin of the Emperor was a decoy as he was not buried there, so the plan failed. Edward thought that using the same tactic would be accepted by the two. In that case, let's just send him into the void. The void? You can think of it as another world where no one could ever find him to revive him. And that is only if he could survive there, explained Edward. The only reason he suggested the first method was because it was easy, cheap, and effortless. Now, he has to go through a lot of trouble, and honestly, he did not think that the Dragon Emperor was worth it. In terms of worth, he is the less valuable amongst all the mummies in the series. There are only two things valuable about him. The first one is his mastery of the 5 elements, and the second is his ability to shapeshift into powerful monsters. When it comes to the former, Edward can learn about them through the Oracle Bones and Ziyuan. As for the former, it was only granted to him after he bathed in the pool of eternal life. How will you send the Emperor to this other world as you stated? Asked Ziyuan. Edward did not answer her but used his watch to contact Morgana. Boss, you finally remember me, complained the little elf. You know how I get when I get too focused. So, did you get the tree? Yes, I have created a garden full of lunar energy to house it. Were there any complications in the process? Not at all. That's good. Let me ask you, in your current state, how long would it take you to send someone to the void? Morgana placed her little finger on her chin, making a thinking pose. Depends. If I physically brought it out with the floating city, a couple of hours. If you want me to remotely send it, then it will take a week. If you bring the item to the city, then it would take 2 days. Edward pondered for a moment, then decided to leave the decision to the mother and daughter. Besides the first options, you can choose one of the other two. Edward did not want the city to leave this universe and leave him unprotected, even for a couple of hours. Who knows what can happen in the meantime? Additionally, he did not want to exit and re-enter this universe. This was a waste of energy and could lead to other problems. So, he explained the other two choices to Ziyuan and let her decide. The second choice is fine. Then, Edward took the 3 of them to Ningxia province in China. Using the gouging spell, he and Hermione managed to dig out the Emperor's tomb in just 2 hours. Finally, they took his body which had turned into a terracotta status. Finally, Edward took the group to the Amazon forest where the floating city was currently landed. During the entire event, Lin had a fascinated look all over her face. She has never seen such a beautiful and advanced place in her more than 2,000 years of life. As for Ziyuan, she was calm and collected during the entire event. She looked like an enlightenment monk who is not affected by mundane life. Then, in front of the two, Edward sent the Emperor's body to the void. As he expected, the latter disintegrated in just a few seconds. His immortality was rendered useless. Back at Shangri-La, Edward looked at Ziyuan and Lin who were packing their things, and asked, "What are you going to do now?" Ziyuan paused as she took a brief look around. "I have lived a very long life. And that time, my only concern has been the revival of the Emperor. Now that I'm free from my duty, it's time to live a normal life. Don't you have any regret regarding giving up your immortality? Any reluctance at all?" "None whatsoever. Birth, aging, sickness, and death are the normal laws of the universe. For many years, I have managed to escape. Now, it's finally my time." Edward sighed as his respect for this woman grew exponentially. He could never accept death so peacefully, nor would he choose it willingly. The world is so vast and there are so many things he wants to see, experience, and accomplish. So, he would never willingly end his immortality. Of course, this was not the only reason he respected her. For more than 2,000 years, Ziyuan has remained loyal to her husband, General Yang. What's more, even though she could resurrect him with the Oracle Bones, she never did so as she respected the rights of the dead to rest in peace. How many people, when given the power to resurrect their loved one without any consequences, would refuse to do so? Only a handful. A wise old man once told me that death is just another journey. Although I refuse to partake in said adventure, I hope yours is fulfilling. "Thank you," said Ziyuan with a beautiful smile. This was the first time that Edward saw her smile, and it was truly wonderful. "What about you? Do you know what you're going to do afterward?" asked Edward to Lin. "I have not decided yet," she replied with a low voice, obviously still sad about her mother's decision. "Well, I hope you do find out soon enough. As Edward watched the family walk down the mountain followed by 3 Yetis, Hermione suddenly asked him. Attracted by her? Can't say I was not. Then, why didn't you make your move? 1. I'm not stupid enough to flirt with another woman in front of you. 2. I genuinely respect her too much to do so. Now I'm jealous of your respect for her. If you can reach a state of mind where you can see death as another adventure, then I'll respect you even more than I do now. Alright, let's go check out this pool of eternal life. I want to know its secret. In just a few days since arriving in this universe, we have benefited a great deal, said Hermione. Indeed. Compared to my last trip where I had to plan and fight powerful entities to get some benefit, this universe is indeed easier. Why do I feel like your words are a red flag before everything goes wrong? You're overthinking things, nothing will happen. As he said that, he started to chant a spell that removed bad luck from him. Hermione just giggled at him after seeing this. Soon, they arrived at the clear pool located in the middle of this large cave. Chapter 230, Divide the Work. Edward's eyes turned purple as he looked at the pool of water in front of him. He could not detect anything so far, so he waved his hand to try to detect other things. As something that granted people immortality, Edward thought that this pool may contain a large amount of life force, and through baptism, grant any person who bathed inside a long lifespan. Unfortunately, he did not detect any. After thinking about it, he realized that this might make sense. In the movie, the pool not only gave immortality but also removed curses. After coming to this conclusion, Edward then remembered the tears of the moon. Thinking about his theory that the tree might be related to divinity, and since this pool might have a similar ability as it, so he and Hermione did a few basic tests. As expected, did discover a very small trace of authority and divine energy. Unfortunately, the power of authority was too small to detect or experiment on. As for the divine energy, Edward compared the data to the ones he had previously acquired from Herpo. The conclusion was that compared to the latter, this divine energy was extremely pure, with no will or imprint inside. Honestly, Edward believed that this level of purity was impossible to be achieved by anyone or any means. For such pure divine energy to be born, most likely, the god to which it belonged must have personally created it and removed his or her imprint from it. According to him, even if one day he had 100% understanding of divine energy, he might not be able to refine it to such purity. Nevertheless, he did not dwell on this issue. With this pool, his understanding of divine energy and gods, in general, will drastically increase. Once he returned to the Empire, it should be no problem completely draining Herpo of his energy and rendering him powerless. Edward opened his watch. Morgana, I will send you a sample and do a few basic tests for me. No problem, boss. A few hours later, Morgana called back, Master, this pool can increase mana. Really? By how much? I do not have much data yet, but it should be enough for all 4 of you to reach tier 6. And if we can add some more herbs that can help boost its effect, that would be even better. Excellent, said Edward with a grin on his face. This was truly good news. According to previous tests made, with his talent, it would take him 73 years to reach tier 6 planetary. And that is only because of his high talent and the fact that the mana needed to reach a higher tier has drastically decreased because of the crystallization process. And unfortunately, most if not all potions and other things that can increase mana have become invalid for Edward. So, he has to rely on his body's natural production process and everyday meditation to absorb mana, which is a tedious and slow process. Because of this situation, bloodline arcanists have an advantage over regular ones since their bodies can produce mana. Luckily for regular arcanists, they are usually more sensitive to mana in the environment and absorbed it at a faster rate. The next day, Edward and Hermione returned to the Amazon to reunite with Lily and Snape. Inside the experiment rooms, the 4 had a meeting. Did you discover anything? Yes. When studying Imhotep, we found out that he is using magic similar to Horcrux, replied Lily. A powerful curse was used to create an indestructible body, then, his entire soul was bound to his body like a Horcrux. Edward nodded his head. With this knowledge, the Empire has an alternate form of immortality, although this method will be labeled as forbidden and strictly guarded. People will be allowed to study it, and if they want to use this method, have to make a request and register their information. Necromancy has many advantages in war. Being able to use the fallen of the enemy against them not only reduce the loss of troops but also destroy morale. I thought that necromancy was already developed in our world, said Hermione. However, compared to Inferi or Haitian zombies, the universe's undead magic is truly advanced. That's true, replied Edward. Alright, we have to divide the work for the next few years. I will be working on understanding necromancy and the soul using all 3 books we acquired. Lily is in charge of figuring out the elementalization power of Aguirre and his men, and Imhotep. You can focus on him since he can turn into sand. Be on guard though, as he might be the pawn of the god Anubis. So, 5 to 6 years from now, you have to kill him and place his body back in his tomb. Edward did not want to intervene with the second Mummy movie as he wanted to verify something during that time. Hermione, you will be in charge of translating this universe's magic system to gate alchemy. I want to be able to identify different kinds of energy and use them to cast a variety of spells. You can use the oracle bones. I also have to warn you. Some of the spells in the book require using the power of the gods. So, in the process of analyzing them, you might peep at their essence and catch their attention, so be careful. As for you, Severus, you are responsible for studying the tears of the moon and the pool of eternal life. Both these things may involve divine energy and the gods, so be careful. Many of our research is related to another, so we can exchange ideas in the process. Boss, what about me? Asked Morgana. Grant all of them the highest level of computing power to help them in their research. All right. There is one last thing, said Edward. Evelyn's soul is special as she has successfully reincarnated. A few years from now, she should regain the memories of her past life. Reincarnation magic is very precious to the Empire, so someone has to constantly check on her. It's best to place something near her that can gather information regarding her soul. Edward wanted to create a reincarnation spell. This way, if something were to happen to him or his family, this spell could be a way to save their lives. If they could keep their previous life memories, then it will be possible to not only escape their enemy's pursuit but also use that past knowledge to secretly grow until they are strong enough to take revenge. Additionally, some universes are too powerful for him to just barge in. However, with a reincarnation spell, he can separate a small part of his soul with his memories to reincarnate into those universes. That way, it becomes easier to sneak in, plus he can have the identity of a citizen of that universe and maybe deal with the problem of world oppression. Of course, Edward knew that this tactic was not perfect as some universes have powerful individuals in control of the underworld and so on. Wouldn't it be better to just place a spell on her soul to gather the data, said Severus. That's a bad idea, replied Lily. There is no way for a mortal to successfully reincarnate with her memories intact. So, only the power of the gods can do so. Meaning, her soul might be marked. If we rashly mess with it, we might alert the people responsible. Edward nodded in agreement. So, who's going to keep watch on her? It's best to keep some level of friendship with the O'Connell to make things easier. No one answered them. All of these people are scientists. When they enter research mode, there is nothing they hate most than interruptions, let alone constant ones. So, although both Lily and Hermione still had some good impressions of the O'Connells, they did not want to take this job. Not to mention Snape and Edward who had conflicts with Rick. In that case, how about we use rune engraving to decide? Absolute not, said the other three in unison. Rune engraving is a new game in the Empire where people, mostly young arcanists, compete on drawing the same rune. The person who drew the rune the fastest and with the best quality was the winner. VV.CM. As such, this kind of game has begun to replace rock paper scissors in the magical community. As the creator of arcane runes, no one wanted to play with Edward as he had too many advantages. Rock paper scissors, said Edward helplessly. With all due respect, Your Highness, something tells me that you would secretly cheat, said Lily casually, which made Edward's mouth twitch. In that case, as your emperor, I ordered you to be the one that goes. Lily started to look around while whistling, acting like she did not hear anything. She even sang a little song in a low voice. All right. Morgana, randomly generate a name between the four of us. You have to be impartial. Edward then gave the other three a stern look when he saw that they wanted to reject his proposal, forcing them to swallow their words. In the end, Snape was chosen for the job and he agreed begrudgingly. Chapter 231, Tier 6 Planetary. Edward was shirtless, displaying his muscles that seemed to be sculpted as if it was the statue of a Greek god. He was doing push-ups while sweat dripped down all over his body. Slight fluctuations could be seen in the surroundings as if the space was trembling slightly. If a normal person entered this room, they would be immediately pulverized because of how high the gravity was compared to Earth. Damn it. I'm a mage, a master of mysticism. Why do I need to train like those barbaric knights? Cursed Edward out loud. Despite his words, he never stopped doing the push-ups while gritting his teeth. White steam emanated out of his body. This was a manifestation of his aura, rapidly circulating inside his body to strengthen his physical stats. The more he exercised, the faster the aura strengthened his body. Plus, once he is in a state of fatigue, it becomes easier to combine mana with life force to create more aura. After a few hours, the gravity enchantments in the room stopped working, and Edward sat in a meditative pose as he began to create more aura inside his body. Unlike mana, which is stored in one place, aura is stored in all parts of the body, muscles, skins, bones, etc. According to studies done by the Empire, creating a core for aura and storing it in one place is actually detrimental to aura masters. For example, when throwing a punch, the aura has to travel from the stored place to the muscles and bones in the arm to increase the power behind the attack. This process required some time no matter how long a person is trained. However, if the aura is stored in the body, the aura master can just use the aura stored in the muscle and bones of their arms when punching. The problem of circulating energy is also a problem for mana. When casting spells, mana has to travel to the magic veins before passing through the hand, which also required training on control. Nevertheless, no matter how talented a person is, his mana cannot instantly travel to his arm. It might take 0.1 seconds or less, but time is still required. If a person is fast enough, they can take advantage of this time gap. Fortunately, after Tier 5, this is no longer a problem. The mana in a Tier 5 individual can instantly leave their bodies to power spells without using the magic veins. So, the magic veins are most useful in the first 4 tiers. Additionally, the mana of Tier 5 individuals has some self-awareness or instinct and can activate on its own when its owner is in danger. Once Edward's meditation finished, he said, "So, how is it? According to the scan of your body, your physical stat should reach the level to bear the Tier 6 crystal mana." "Excellent," replied Edward. "A lot of things happened in the past 7 years. It took him a year to recover to his normal self. During this time, he discovered that constantly overused of his mana and refilling it accelerated the adaptation process. Then, he also discovered that by combining this universe's magic system with his arcane rune magic, the problems it was having were solved. The solution to his problem was just replacing some of the runes and the languages used in this universe with the ones used in his world and Full Metal Alchemist world. This change did not increase the power of the arcane magic system, only added versatility to it. However, Edward was not satisfied with this. So, after Hermione translated this universe's magic system to gate alchemy and allow arcanists to use all kinds of different energy to cast spells, he tasked her to combine this discovery so that arcane rune magic does not rely solely on mana but also on different energies. That way, the gate alchemists in the Empire can now really be considered casters instead of purely relying on transfiguration to accomplish supernatural feats. Edward took a potion that was golden in color and swirled it a little while smiling. Over the past years, Snap has made some discoveries regarding the pool of eternal life. The current theory is that this pool is essentially the essence of a god. And what exactly is this divine essence? It is a combination of a god's blood, soul, divine energy, life energy, and even their authority. Essentially, the core of their existence. This is the reason that after people bathe in this pool, they can acquire immortality. Well, to be exact, it granted mortals a long lifespan. According to a study of Ziyuan and Lin's genes, they can live for millions of years, so they are not technically immortal, just have a long lifespan. Another benefit of the godly essence is the ability to remove curses. This was shown when the Dragon Emperor used it to remove the curse Ziyuan placed on him. And it was not just the pool, but the tears of the moon were also created by the essence of some lunar deity, just like the story about the warrior who shot the moon indicated. As such, taking its petals not only can prolong life, cure diseases, and remove curses. However, the tree was not as powerful as the pool, which indicated that either not enough divine essence was used to create it, or the god the essence came from was not powerful as the one from the pool of eternal life. Anyway, for now, this did not matter. After analyzing the pool, Snape created a potion with it that can increase mana. Edward has been using it non-stop in the past 6 years to the point of almost advancing to Tier 6. Edward did not immediately drink the potion but slept for a few hours to ensure that he was in peak shape. Finally, he drank the whole thing. Why do those potions always taste weird? Aren't gods supposed to be the perfect life form? Wouldn't their flesh taste delicious? Edward paused for a moment as the idea of what God's flesh tasted like could not escape his mind. Would that be considered cannibalism? Not if I eat some animal gods. So what if it can talk and change its shape to that of a human? It's still an animal. Immediately, he placed eating an animal god on his bucket list for things to do in the future. However, he had other things to do as his mana was drastically increasing. Dafien Nuel. Extension Curse was already engraved on his magic core to ensure that it could expand with the increase in mana. Edward had to be very focused to properly control the mana. After an unknown amount of time, Edward heard a breaking sound from his body. It was like he had broken some kind of shackle. Then, the crystal mana in his core melted away, returning to the liquid. However, this liquid mana did not look like the blue river of Tier 4 but twinkled like stars. The mana then traveled through Edward's magic veins to different parts of his body. Immediately, Edward had to grit his teeth. Wherever the man passed by, it will first destroy and then reconstruct, whether it was his skin, muscle, bones, organs, cells, and genes. They would be destroyed and replaced by new ones. During the process, Edward had to endure tremendous pain while controlling his mana to ensure that it did not go out of control and destroyed everything without rebuilding them. This required great control and a powerful soul. Once the reconstruction was finished, the star-like mana entered his soul dimension and began to nourish his soul. Unlike the strengthening of the body, the one for the soul was not as painful. In fact, it was not remotely painful. It felt like when someone was bathing in a hot spring. The mind and spirit were completely relaxed, free of any stress or worry. Despite this, Edward was on guard as he felt that if he were to indulge too deeply in this feeling, something bad might happen to him. He decided to believe in his intuition and test out if he was correct or not later on. After the soul was strengthened to a certain measure, his mana returned to the core and once again crystallized. Immediately afterward, Edward received a message in his mind that he had reached Tier 6. Chapter 232, The Path of God. According to the tier system in his universe, to become a Tier 6 required someone to have the ability to blow a planet with relative ease or survive the destruction of a planet with relative ease. And Edward knew that he fit both criteria. While feeling the changes inside his body, suddenly, another Edward appeared next to the original one. The two looked exactly the same, making it impossible for the usual method to distinguish the two. The second Edward was in fact his soul. One of the abilities of Tier 6 individuals is the ability for their souls to take corporeal form, making them indistinguishable from their bodies. Because of this, once a Tier 6 individual's body is dead, they can still survive as long as their souls are intact and possessed someone else to revive themselves, similar to a ghost. Isn't this the nascent soul or primordial spirit of Xianxia novels, muttered Edward as he analyzed this new ability. Before this, he had the ability of astral projection, which is similar to this. However, back then, his soul still looked illusory, like it was a projection. But now, he could not distinguish between his soul and body. Of course, Edward knew that this soul ability had a real reason for existing. In the Harry Potter universe, Tier 6 is a limit for many races. The majority of species do not have the magical ability to reach Tier 6, and even if they do, this is their limit. The main reason for that is a large amount of mana difference between Tier 6 planetary to Tier 7 star. The Sun is 109 times the Earth in terms of diameters. It weighs 330,000 times that of the Earth, and 1.3 million planet Earth can fit inside the Sun. And the Sun is not that big of a star compared to some others in the vast universe. As such, the large scope between each tier is so high that even if granted a lifetime, a lot of species would never be able to gather enough mana to ascend to higher tiers. Adding to that is the fact that unlike the mana frequency of the Empire's arcanists, most magic systems with different mana frequencies do not grant people long lifespans. Usually, they have to rely on the characteristic of their species to live a long life or other methods. After knowing this fact, Edward knew that the original magic system of the Harry Potter universe was unique and possibly has some secrets when it comes to its origin. Although Tier 6 is the limit of most species in terms of mana, there are still ways forward for them, the path of godhood. In that tier, individuals can begin to gather faith as a way forward. With enough believers, they can light up the divine fire in their souls to cast their divine body. However, their original body must be left behind. Once the divine fire and divine body are cast, these people can be considered false gods, as there are two more steps. One is to choose a divinity/authority for their godheads. That way, they will become god of death, god of light, god of the sky, etc. Of course, a person cannot just choose a divinity and become such a god. For example, if a person wanted to become a time god, he has to have a plethora of knowledge on time magic before becoming a god. Otherwise, the process of casting their divinity/controlling his authority will fail and they will die. Additionally, Edward heard that other gods with similar divinities might interfere with the promotion of another to prevent future competition. After casting their divinity, a person will then be referred to as a pseudo-god. And only after the last process will they become real gods. And the final process is to create the God Kingdom and rise to the outer realm. The God Kingdom is essentially a small universe where the souls of God's believers will go after death. It is rumored that gods are the most powerful in their kingdom. As for the outer realm? Well, in Edward's universe, gods are not allowed to intervene in the material realm. So, once someone becomes god, they have to enter the outer realm with their kingdom. The only way for a god to use his power in the physical world is by having a vessel that can hold their powers. They can descend into the physical world by taking over the body of their chosen vessels. Vessels are usually very talented people that are compatible with the power of a certain god, hence the reason that they are chosen. Usually, people with the same bloodline as a god are the perfect vessels. Unfortunately, it is very difficult for a god to reproduce and leave offsprings beings. Vessels are usually referred to as saint or saintess and hold very high power in the church of their god. More often than not, they are usually the pope. After feeling the power inside his body, Edward began to think about the knowledge he has about gods. He would never walk the path of faith. Forget the fact that these people are essentially prisoners stuck in the outer realm, there is still a great downside to faith gods. As long as they have enough believers, the gods can rapidly rise in rank. However, in the same way, as long as these believers stopped believing or are killed, the power of the gods would drastically plummet. So, Edward did not want such unreliable power. Nevertheless, he did not even have the method to become a god, as this knowledge is quite rare. Even if he did, he would not use it. But he still was interested in using the power of God without the downsides, if possible. So far, his only hope of doing so lies with Herpo. Since he had advanced to a higher tier, Edward tested his power. Suddenly, he disappeared, and when he appeared again, he was already on planet Mars. He disappeared again and appeared on Jupiter. He repeated this process until he arrived on Neptune. After that, he began to test his destructive power. This time, he did not use the room of requirement to recreate planet Earth or other planets in the solar system. That would be a waste of energy. He took a ship to travel throughout the galaxy and discovered inhabited planets or asteroids of different sizes. Then, he would use powerful spells. According to the data gathered, he can destroy a planet the size of Jupiter, but more than 90% of his mana would be gone in the process. After that, he did one last test. He separated his soul from his body, yet his body was able to function on its own. It could walk, talk, and even cast spells on its own. This was the result of one of many of Lily's research over the years, using the connection of the soul and the body to control it. This magic has similar properties to how Edward can communicate with another part of his soul across universes through the soul dimension. Although this spell seemed useless, it has great value. For one, it increased Edward's knowledge of the soul. Over the past years, he has been studying the Book of the Dead and the Book of Amun-Ra extendedly. As a result, he has now a very deep understanding of necromancy, soul magic, and the underworld/afterlife. His current knowledge allows him to call someone's soul from the beyond in any universe. Previously, he would need the help of the Deathly Hallows to call someone's soul from Herpo's hand. But now, he can do it alone. Now, no matter where he goes, as long as he adapts to the universe and said universe has a concept of the underworld, he should be able to call the soul of the diseases from the afterlife. Of course, Edward would not easily do so as his spell is not as covert as he would like. By using it, it is easier for him to alert any god or entity in charge of the underworld, thus causing trouble to himself. Now, back to the soulless body controlling magic. Another benefit of this spell is that it can be used to lure an enemy out during a time of danger. That way, the enemy could destroy a caster's body while the soul survives. After all, a body can be recreated, but once the soul is destroyed, it is permanent death. And the last advantage that Edward can think of this magic is how beneficial it would be to the gods in his universe. If they could control their original bodies after ascending to godhood, they could use this spell to use their original body as a vessel instead of searching for someone else that is compatible with them. This spell could help have more power and control in the physical world. After all the tests were finished, Edward finally left his room as he knew that it was time for the plot of the second Mummy movie to begin. Chapter 233, Anubis Plan. Edward left his room to the living room where he saw Hermione waiting for him. "How was your advancement?" she asked. "Everything went fine except that I slightly underestimated how painful the process was," replied Edward with a smile. "Don't be such a crybaby. Hee, when it's your turn, you'll understand. Speaking of, how long do you think it will take you to also advance?" Hermione shook his head. "It will take some time. Over the years, although my physical stats has reached the level required for advancement, my spiritual power is not enough to control such large and powerful mana. I still need some time to learn and increase the power of my soul." She was slightly envious of Edward's talent. He can easily absorb a large quantity of knowledge to rapidly increase the strength of his soul. As for her, the process was not as easy or smooth and requires years of constant research and studying. Edward caressed her hair. "There is no need to be envious, as sooner or later, you will also reach the same tier as me. Plus, how many people in Empire are envious of your talent? I'm just worried that I will not be able to keep up with your footstep," she said as she laid her head on his shoulder. "With your talent, becoming a Tier 11 multiversal arcanist is only a matter of time. And luckily, time is something that we do not lack." She smiled while nodding her head. "What about Tier 12? Edward paused for a moment. "Honestly, I have no idea what this level is. I don't even know if I can reach such a level. You should have more confidence in yourself." "You're probably right," replied Edward. "How is the situation with your talent?" "The situation is still the same. I cannot locate any dimensions in this universe to summon things from it. To be precise, these dimensions seem very vague, to be like they were blocked." Edward frowned a little after hearing this. Either the rule of this universe is very strict when it comes to dimensional spells, or these dimensions are occupied by other people and are inaccessible. However, there might be another way. "Are you referring to the bracelet of Anubis?" "Yes. This bracelet allows the user to summon an army of immortal humanoid jackal species. By studying it, you could probably gain access to the underworld and summon these things. Of course, this will also mean that you are essentially stealing from Anubis." Hermione nodded her head. Now that they had recovered, including the floating city, their fears of the gods have greatly decreased. "Speaking of the bracelet, we have done as you instructed and handed the Book of the Dead to the cultists. They have already used it to revive Imhotep. So, the plot of Mummy 2 has begun," thought Edward. "Let's go check things out." He went into a room where Lily and Snape were waiting for him. In the middle of the room was a projection that displayed the O'Connell along with their 8-year-old son, Alex, in a tomb procuring the amulet of Anubis. After seeing this, the first thing that popped into Edward's mind was the power of correction of fate. Even with his existence, the plot of the Mummy corrected itself and returned to its original destination. Edward even theorized that even if he did not give the Book of the Dead to the cult led by Bladus Halfez, these people might still find a way to revive Imhotep, or used someone else that could replace his role. He once asked Merlin about this power, and the old man told him that most universes involving primordial Earth actually operated in the same way. Although not all of them, most of them do. However, according to Merlin, as long as you actively interact in the plot, it will change until it becomes impossible to revert to its original track. As he looked at what was happening, Edward began to move. Hermione, when the cult abducts Alex, you can become invisible and stay next to him to study the ability of the amulet. Once the boy arrives at the temple in Shire and removes the bracelet, you can act based on the situation. If you have already learned something from it, just ignore it. If not, control Bladus and have him activate it, then study the summoning process. Edward then looked at Lily and Snape. Lily, you are in charge of the insignia at the entrance of the temple that took away Imhotep's power. Get there early and try to find out how Anubis was able to take away his power, and maybe even why.frwl. See. As for you Snape, you are responsible for Evelyn and Mila. During this journey, these two will begin to remember the memories of their past lives. Secretly monitor their souls at all times and gather as much information as possible. Additionally, when Evelyn dies, you have to appear with the Book of the Dead and resurrect her yourself. That's the exact moment when her memories are restored and the perfect opportunity to gather the best data. What about you? What are you going to do? Asked Hermione. I'm going to watch the battlefield between Anubis' army and the Medjai. I should be able to verify a few things. After that, the group scattered to do their own things. When Alex is kidnapped, Hermione appeared next to him to study the bracelet on his hand. Snape used clone spells to create a second version of himself. The original stayed with Mila, who was the reincarnation of Anxunaman and Imhotep's lover. The other one was with Evelyn, both secretly monitoring the state of these people's souls. The previous Snape would not be able to do such a thing to a Tier 4 Imhotep, but now, with his Tier 5 that was very close to Tier 6, it was easier to do. As for Lily, she reached the temple where the Scorpion King was buried and began to study the insignia at the entrance. Just like that, a few days passed. The army of the Medjai led by the charismatic Ardith stood in the desert waiting for their opponent. Soon, a bunch of mummified jackal-headed humanoids appeared in front of them. They were the army of Anubis. Soon, a battle between these two groups began. In terms of battle prowess, the Medjai had the advantage, especially with guns. Unfortunately, the jackals were immortals. Even after being destroyed, they would spawn once again. However, Edward did not care about this. As more people died, he closed his eyes to detect something. Before this battle, he placed a tracking mark on these people's souls. And after they die, he immediately began to trace where their souls were going. At first, he could not find anything. However, over time, he soon discovered that their soul was being transported to a different space, to another dimension. Their souls were being transported to a very specific place in that dimension, and while trying to find the final destination, Edward soon saw a giant humanoid jackal-headed individual who was lying in a golden coffin. The souls were being swallowed by him. Immediately, that jackal opened his eyes and looked straight at Edward. Mortal, you dare stare at a god. Immediately, the connection to that pocket dimension was cut off. Blood began to drip from Edward's nose. Interesting, he muttered as his mind started to rapidly function. Many pieces that seem unrelated began to be placed together. However, he did not immediately conclude anything as he needed one final piece of the puzzle. So, he contacted Lily. Did you discover something? Yes, she replied. Anubis did not just take Imhotep's power but placed something inside of his body. According to my current theory, this should allow Imhotep to become his vessel and maybe possess his body. As expected. Did you discover something on your side? Yes. If I'm not mistaken, the gods in this world seem to have fallen asleep for some reason and are drastically weakened. And when it came to Anubis, he is planning on releasing his undead army in the world to kill as many people as possible to absorb the souls of mortals to regain his power. Edward knew that situation was more complex than stated. The Scorpion King has been rumored to revive for more than 5,000 years, so Anubis might have planned this for so long. Edward believed that the latter planned to take over Imhotep's body, then kill the Scorpion King and take back control of the army. However, another Egyptian god intervened to stop him, Osiris. The latter did this by sending Rick with a spear capable of killing the Scorpion King, thus preventing Anubis from regaining control of the undead army. Edward squinted his eyes as he thought deeply. Anubis' plan was not that simple. If things proceeded smoothly, Imhotep should have already revived and taken over Egypt more than 8 years ago, and maybe even started a war with the entire world. Then, all Anubis had to do was wait for a few years later when Imhotep goes to the Scorpion King's temple, strip him of his power to reduce resistance, take over his body, and control the undead army. Unfortunately, in both instances, he was stopped by the O'Connells who represented his father Osiris. As for the reason Anubis needed to go to such length to possess Imhotep, there is an explanation for this in the Mummy reboot. Although Edward did not see the movie, he did watch the trailers and some videos online and knew a little spoiler. In the finale of the movie, the god set took over the body of the main character Nick, played by Tom Cruise. However, in the end, Nick was able to suppress Set's consciousness and take back control of his body while keeping Set's power. This shows that possessing anyone is not an easy task for the current state of these gods. Truth be told, Anubis and Set might not be the only people using this method of soul sacrifice and body possession to regain their powers. In Mummy 3, the Dragon Emperor had a similar plan to use an army of undead to take over the world. Most likely, some Chinese gods had a similar plan as Anubis and have been planning this for over 2,000 years, using the Emperor and Zi Yuan as pawns in their games. Chapter 234, Population. The question that Edward has to answer now is what happened to the gods? What happened that rendered them in such a weak state? And could he use the current situation to his advantage? The current situation is the perfect time to invade the place these gods are sleeping, kill or capture them. However, this has many risks as he does not know how powerful they are, whether they are truly weak or have already regained some strength. With so many variables, Edward decided to take things slow before acting. After all, he still had plenty of time. The first step in his plan is to wait for when Set takes over Nick's body and then capture him. That way, he can have access to information and knowledge about the current state of the gods. Although he has to wait at least 60 years, he did not mind. He could find something to preoccupy himself in the meantime. While in deep thought, Hermione suddenly apparat next to him. How is it? As we suspected. I can now summon an army from the underworld. Did anyone try to stop you? Yes, but it's useless. How so? Asked Edward. The way my talent works is that it allowed me to use the underworld itself to form contracts with my summon. Essentially, I directly contact the will of consciousness of the underworld for the summon. So, as long as I can sense and reach the other dimensions, no one should be able to stop me. That's excellent. What about other dimensions? Can you sense any others? No, replied Hermione with a frown. This world is truly weird. Take your time, we still have time. Not long after, Snape and Lily also appeared. How is it? He asked Snape. I did record a lot of data regarding Evelyn's reincarnation. From what I gathered, her memories were stored in some sort of seed deep in her soul. Somehow, the seed was not discovered during the reincarnation process, and at the right moment, it activated and the memories were returned. Edward nodded his head as he knew that the situation was more complex than stated. All individuals have an imprint on their souls that showed that they are the natural citizens of a universe. Because of this imprint, once outsiders like Edward and the others travel to other universes, they are easily discovered and suppressed by the rules of that universe. Before Edward can create a reincarnation spell, he has to find a way to remove the imprint in his soul, then allows his soul to be imprinted by the universe that he is going to be reincarnated into. The previous him would be very confused about how to solve all the problems regarding the reincarnation spell. However, the Book of the Dead, the Book of Amun-Ra, and the Oracle Bones have extensive knowledge on the soul, life and death, and even the underworld. In the past 8 years, he had only scratched the surface of these books. With further study, he should come really close to achieving his objective. It would be best to have an expert on the soul to continue this study, said Snape. Although he had vast knowledge of the subject, it was not his main focus. So, he knew that it would be best for someone more qualified to take on this research. Edward agreed with him. However, the situation was a little complicated. The spells in the 3 books relied too heavily on borrowing the power of the gods to be of use. As such, they would most likely become useless once Edward returned home unless he could find another god to borrow power from or steal power from. Although he had already translated these spells to the arcane rune magic, the best place to further study these books was in this universe. Of course, once he returned home, he will try to see if they could work on Herpo. I will let Morgana take on this research, replied Edward. Where is the Book of the Dead? Previously, to ensure that the plot did not deviate too much, the book was handed to the cults so that they could revive Imhotep. Now that the mummy was once again killed and the world was once again saved by the O'Connells, the book had to return to Edward. Snape handed the book to him. Now that we have some free time, what are you guys going to do? Asked Edward. I will continue my research on Aguirre and his men, replied Lily. Oh, did you make a discovery? Maybe. Over the years, she has been studying the ancient magic known as love magic. Unfortunately, even after decades, she is still the only person in the Empire who can use it. Nevertheless, Lily did make some discoveries. According to her theory, the reason she can use such powerful magic is that some powerful will, most likely the will of the universe, acknowledges the sacrifice she made for Harry, and after being brought back to life, it granted her control over this magic. The love protection spell she used on Harry has been used by a few people over the years, however, none of them were brought back to life. This is the reason that she's the only person who can actively use this magic. Beforehand, Lily was confused about how to move forward in her research. However, during her study of Aguirre's elementalization ability, she had an idea. There are many kinds of love in the world: love of family, love of life, romantic love, and love of the environment and the planet. The focus of her idea was on the last one. The reason that she could use this magic was because of her love for her son, and the desire to protect him at all costs, which resonated with the will of the universe. If some people share that same love, that same passion or desire to protect the environment, then maybe, they can resonate with the will of planet and Earth and be granted similar magic. And it does not have to be the planet, they could resonate with forests, mountains, rivers, and even animals. After hearing Lily's description, the group felt that her method might actually work. However, they also gave her a strange look. I know what I just described is the same concept of druids, said Lily calmly. Well, I have no problem with you inventing the career of druids. However, be mindful to not create the type that loves nature above everything else, otherwise, given the current circumstances of the Empire, these people will have a lot of trouble. When it comes to nature preservation, the Empire has done a great job in general. The issue lies with animals. Poaching and using animals for experiments is prevalent in the Empire, and with how druids often love nature more than their lives, they would most likely not stand for this kind of thing, which will in turn lead them to confrontation with many powerful people in the Empire, including the Elder Council, as animal testing is legal as long as they are moderately controlled. Lily nodded her head. I will create doctrines to ensure that they do not become too radical. Additionally, I will be careful about who to choose once I actually create this new profession. The best people to become druids are environmental activists, as they truly care for nature and should be able to resonate with it. However, people who are too extreme in their beliefs should not be accepted. Well, what about you, Severus? What are you going to do? I'm going to continue studying the tears of the moon and the pool of eternal life. These rare materials should be able to create many new potions. After that, the group returned to the floating city to do their research. Inside a room, Edward called Morgana. How are the things that I asked you to check? I did. I compare the birth certificate of more than 100 million people and compare them to our records. Not a single person is the same in our empire except for a few historical individuals like Einstein and Oppenheimer. In other words, we could plunder the population of this universe without having the issue of doppelgangers, said Edward with a smile. The population is very important to any empire, and Edward has been worrying about this issue for some time, especially regarding the human race population. Most of the human race on other planets lived in the medieval era where they have very little access to knowledge except for the nobility or lucky ones, so their minds are very shackled. After conquering them, Edward knew that it would take a lot of time and effort to make these people accept the way of life of the arcane empire. Because of this, he wanted a large population from modern times as they were more easily integrated given that the right method is used. Now, his voyage into this Earth-like universe gave him the perfect chance for plundering the population. Master, although the people here have no problem, I discovered that they have a very low talent for magic. And the number of people who do is also very small. Show me the data, said Edward as he reviewed the information, then, he frowned. Just like Morgana said, in general, the average talent for magic for the people in this universe is truly low. After pondering for a while, he asked, do we have any dragon potion in stock? Yes, but not enough to feed more than 3 billion people. Of course not, replied Edward. We just need to dump a large enough amount in the water reserve of all countries. That way, large people can awaken their talent for magic even if it is low. We can then classify the awakened people based on the level of their talents, then secretly manipulate them to ensure that people of the same level marry with one another so that more talented arcanists can be born. After a few generations of this process, the general talent of the entire population should drastically rise. Morgana pondered for a moment as she did many calculations. This should be possible, but it will still take a lot of resources and time. We have plenty of time. As for resources, the dragon heart used in the potion is a renewable resource. We can even grant the dragons in captivity access to potions made from the pool of eternal life to ensure that they are perfectly fine. As you wish. ________________________ Chapter 235, More Worlds. 1935, 2 years passed since the second Mummy movie. Edward sat in a comfortable chair with a book in his hand labeled, An Analysis of Negative Energy, which was written by Hermione based on her recent research development. He had a pipe in his hand like an old-fashioned British gentleman. The tobacco he was using was created by him. It contained magical herbs that could relax the mind, help with anxiety, and inspired rapid thinking. While smoking and reading, the door opened and 2 people walked in. They were dressed rather lavishly. I know this was a kid's dinner party, but it's only 9 o'clock, so why are you guys back so early? Severus was as grumpy as usual, so we had to leave early, replied Lily as she hung her coat. Despite her words, she seemed to have a joyous smile on her face. So, what happened this time? Did you argue with Rick again? You should have given the man some respect. After all, it is his son's 10th birthday, said Edward as he looked at Snape. It had nothing to do with O'Connell this time. Then, who was it? It was another archaeologist, one of Eddie's peers, said Snape as he poured a drink for himself. I thought that O'Connell was an insufferable idiot who only rely on his luck to survive, said Snape while jugging his drink. But he can't compare to that Dr. Jones. The man flirts with every woman he sees. I thought he was very charming, said Lily with a smirk. To which Snape just scoffed, obviously not happy that he was teasing him. Wait, you said there was an archaeologist named Dr. Jones, suddenly said Edward. What's his full name? I think it was Henry Jones, Jr., however, he seems to prefer the name, Indiana Jones. Some people even call him Indy. Immediately, something clicked in Edward's mind. Morgana, you should have a file on this person? The little purple elf appeared next to him and waved her hand to show a file on Indiana Jones. This person is on the list of people I was monitoring to see if they could be useful for the Empire, she explained. After seeing the picture of Indiana Jones and rapidly going over the information gathered on him, Edward knew that it was the same whip-wielding professor that he knew. So, he closed his eyes and reviewed the information he had on the subject. He remembered going to see the Indiana movies when he was a boy. He remembered how scary the second one was. He was a fan for a long time, so he saw all 4 movies. Immediately afterward, Edward started laughing out loud like a madman, even alerting Hermione, who was resting in the next room. This world is like a present that keeps on giving, muttered Edward because of how excited he was. However, he also quickly calmed down to assess the situation. So far, 3 different movies or universes showed, so, there might be more. As such, he needed to be on the watch for such a possibility. As for the Indiana movies, he pondered how he could get the most advantage. After pondering for a while, he realized that the greatest benefit came from the last movie. Although the 4th installment was the less critically received of all the films, in terms of benefit, it is the one he values the most. It is 1935, so it should be when Indy discovers the Sankara stones. These stones only have little value in studying. However, next year, he will find the Ark of the Covenant, the warehouse. That's my next destination. He looked at the 3 who were waiting on him and said, tomorrow, I will take you somewhere. The next day, using the information that Morgana gathered overnight, Edward led the group to a warehouse that was guarded by the U.S. military. With an invisible spell, the 4 of them were not detected at all. Where are we going exactly? Asked Hermione. A warehouse full of magical items, replied Edward. After Indiana Jones acquired the Ark of the Covenant, the U.S. government placed it in a warehouse that contained many items related to the supernatural, preventing it from being studied or displayed in any museums. After entering the warehouse, the group was truly surprised at how many magical items there were. Why are there so many? I thought magic was almost instinct in this universe, asked Hermione. They were most likely forged by the gods themselves, said Edward as he checked a few items. He was suddenly interested in the crafting method of these artifacts. Let's take all of them back to the ship, said Edward, which proceeded to place all the artifacts into interdimensional bags. Then, before leaving, he placed an enchantment in the warehouse that will display a powerful illusion. The illusion will show that these artifacts were still here. Afterward, the group traveled all over the world to take the artifacts' secrecy kept by the powerful countries in this era. The Germans were obsessed with the supernatural at this time, so they had the most of them, even more than the US. After this, Edward wanted to go straight to Peru for the interdimensional beings that appeared in the 4th movie. However, he refrained from doing so as he wanted to be more prepared for his plan to succeed. He had to wait until 1947 for safety measures. In the meantime, he was prepared to study these artifacts. The forging system in this world can be considered the epitome of magetech engineering. All normal people can use powerful magic items without having any talent or possessing any mana. Unlike in the Empire, which requires mana crystals to power up magical items, the artifacts in this world seem to build with energy embedded deep inside, and even can regenerate such energy after use. Adding to that the fact that most of the artifacts were most likely built by gods themselves, he was truly interested in them. So, after categorizing the artifacts and identifying them, then, each of the 4 of them took an item that was beneficial to them. Hermione took one that was also related to summoning undead, however, this one was related to Sumerian gods and their underworld. Lily found the shield of Athena in the warehouse. According to information they gathered, this shield was used as a guardian artifact for the entire city of Athens. She thinks that she could find inspiration from it. Snape found an old cauldron that belonged to a famous Chinese alchemist that can help brew powerful elixirs. He was quite excited, but he refused to show it. Once everybody picked their artifacts, Edward also chose his and entered a room in the city. Morgana, charge the void cannon and lock the room where the experiment will take place, ordered Edward seriously. As you wish, said Morgana. After she made the necessary precaution, she began the experiment. She used an artifact that contained divine energy inside. To ensure safety, the artifact was previously identified as belonging to a lesser god in the Aztec pantheon and used the time record spell. The reason for being so cautious was in case the gods were powerful enough to use this opportunity to revive themselves. Or, powerful enough to attack across space and time. Plus, unlike his world where he feared messing with time, he did not mind that much since he could run away in case something was wrong. Edward has always been cautious when taking risks and irresponsible when needed. Once the spell was cast, an image was displayed in the room, showing one of the gods forging a magical item. The process was not as complicated as Edward expected. The god took a few ores and used his power to change the shape to its desired outcome. Then, he muttered a few words while injecting divine energy into the item. And just like that, the magical artifact was created. There were no runes, no engraving, or anything else. Of course, this was to the untrained eyes. Edward could see that the words spoken by this god were actually a form of enchantment, similar to a blessing. For example, if he wanted to create a magical item that could glow. In his forging system, he would engrave the Lumos words on the item as an enchantment. However, the gods only need to say the Lumos charm in a special way to form the enchantment. Additionally, they also need to insert the divine energy in a special way for the enchantment to remain permanent, and to ensure that there is enough energy for the item to be activated. Edward became excited after discovering this new enchantment method that he labeled word blessing. So, he immediately began to use time record on other magical artifacts from different pantheon, Egyptian, Mayan, Mesopotamian, etc. Although all these gods used different languages in their forging process, the general outline was the same. Then, Edward focused on the forging gods in the different pantheons as he knew that these people were the pinnacle of artificers amongst the gods. See, although he was a little about these gods attacking him across space and time, he still took some risks to observe some of the powerful gods. Luckily, he seemed to be overthinking things. Just like that, Edward was engrossed in his study until he forgot the passage of time. Chapter 236, The Library. Edward looked at the black book labeled, The Necromancy Book, in his hand and a smile appeared on his face. This book was his replica of the Book of the Dead after many years of studying. More importantly, this book was used using word blessing enchantment only and contained a massive amount of negative energy inside to replace the power of the underworld. From the study of the group over the years, negative energy is the fundamental energy produced by death and has a great influence on things like the soul and the undead. Using it, it is easier to manipulate the soul, dead bodies, cursed people, and many more. Using the necromancy book that Edward created, a normal person could easily create and control mummies or the undead, enslaved a person's soul, and revive the dead by stealing their souls from the underworld. Of course, one of the reasons that the last one is possible is because of the fact that all the gods are sleeping and the underworld is on auto-function. Otherwise, that would cause many problems. As he looked at the book in his hand, Edward had to sigh that all magic systems had their uniqueness and advantages. Additionally, there is usually some connection between each other. After years of studying the gods' forging, he discovered the essence of their forging method. In some way, it is somewhat similar to the method of the dwarves in his universe. Most dwarves are not good at enchantment, but they can still refine powerful magical artifacts. The reason for that is that they can process magical ores to their ultimate efficiency, and even bring out their magical properties. For example, if someone wanted a fire magical item from the dwarves, they would need to bring or pay for ores with fire elements or properties. Then, the dwarves would process that magical ore while retaining the fire property of that ore. Let's say that they made a sword with that ore. When mana is used in that sword, it could probably shoot fireballs, simply heat up, or the tip of the sword will burst into flames. It all depends on the skill of the dwarf, the rarity of the magical ore used, and other factors. Nevertheless, it does not change the fact that the dwarves usually do not need enchantment to craft their magical artifacts. However, because of this, they are also restrained by materials in their craftsmanship. Fortunately, because of this, they have developed numerous alloys and formulas that combine different ores or minerals. In this universe, the forging gods also do the same as the dwarves when it comes to material, but they also add word blessing enchantments to further elevate the power of their artifacts. One of the greatest gains that Edward received during his recent study was that he discovered one of Zeus's lightning bolts and he managed to watch how Hephaestus forged them. This was quite a learning experience. Master, with your current ability, you should be able to maximize the floating city by at least 30%, said Morgana as she appeared next to Edward. True, he replied. If we had enough divine energy, we could completely remodel it to the next level. Edward looked at the room full of artifacts and sighed. Many of these artifacts were created by powerful human sorcerers and he also learned a lot from them. A few of them were created naturally because they were present at some special location or during special events, while a few were created because of legends created by people long after their existence. The process is similar to gathering faith. Because many myths were created by people over the years regarding certain artifacts, these artifacts then became a reality. How long has it been? Asked Edward. 12 years, it's about the time you told me to watch out for, replied Morgana. Do you want to go to Peru now? No, I still have to wait for the crash, replied Edward. What about other supernatural events? Did you discover anything? Yes. I found 2 secret societies that have been fighting for centuries over magical artifacts all over the world. Which one? One is called the Library, while the other is called the Serpent Brotherhood. Edward pondered deeply as these 2 words were present in his memory. He remembered that after watching the entire new series of Doctor Who, he searched for shows similar to it online and discovered the library. He watched all 3 movies and they were somewhat entertaining. Although nothing compared to Doctor Who, it did somewhat fill the void in his heart. He even knew that there was a series later on but he never watched it. The librarian, Flynn Carson, muttered Edward. This is a very intelligent man who also pursues knowledge, he would make a great arcanist. However, he needs to be well trained and prevented from becoming the librarian. What happened to Hermione and the others? They were also deep in their research and have not left, replied Morgana. Edward was relieved after hearing this. After all, he just spent 10 years completely ignoring his wife. This could bring him trouble. Luckily, all arcanists became hyper-focused once they enter research mode. And more often than not, they hate being disrupted. Master, since you're now done with these artifacts, what are you going to do with them? Recycle them to remove the divine energy inside. Once we find a method to remove the divine imprints inside, they will be of great use. After that, he left. USA, New York, Metropolitan Public Library. Edward, who was well dressed in a black suit, white shirt, long coat, hat, and a black cane, walked inside the library. As soon as he walked to a special and isolated area of the library, he saw 4 people waiting for him with a somber looks on their faces. With a smile on his face, he looked at the 2 old people in this group and said, "You two must Judson and Charlene. As for you two, you must be the current librarian and guardian." No one answered him for a while before the old man named Judson said, "Sorcerer, why did you come here? So, you're aware of my existence?" Numerous artifacts were stolen all over the world from different governments and replaced by a very powerful illusion. "We know that it was you who did," said the current librarian who looked like a suave man in his early 40s. Edward did not recognize him. After all, he was only aware of 3 librarians if you count Judson. "I'm curious about how you managed to detect me," said Edward. "It must be a very powerful artifact. Let me guess, Hautian mirror from the Jade Emperor." According to legend, the mirror allowed him to observe all 3 realms. Or, maybe one of Odin's ravens. After all, he used them to spy on information on all the 9 realms. No one answered him. Then, the librarian asked, "What is your purpose in coming here?" "You know, there is no need for any animosity between the 2 of us," said Edward calmly. "I only want 2 things. One is to read all the books in the library. And 2, I need the H.G. Wells time machine." "There is no way we would allow this," replied Judson. "Our purpose is to prevent such powers to land on the wrong hand. How about we take a step back? I will only study the time machine. You can even supervise me during the entire process," said Edward. However, he could see the determination on these people's faces. "So many powerful artifacts are in my possession, and yet, for the past 12 years, I have never used them for any nefarious means. I understand that the library is in a battle between good and evil, and I do not care about that. What I want is simply knowledge." Judson looked at the other people for a moment before saying to Edward, "I'm afraid that we have to refuse." "Can I ask why?" asked Edward. "Ever since you came to this building, I have secretly used an artifact to determine whether you were a good person or not. I'm guessing that the result was not to your satisfaction." "You can say that," replied Judson. "Although your body is covered in a golden hue which symbolized all the good things you have accomplished in your life, this cannot change all the horrifying things you also committed." What Judson did not say was that he was truly horrified by all the sins that he discovered related to Edward. What made him even more puzzled was the fact that this artifact identified him as a person with good karma, meaning that not only did this person commit many sins in his life, he also committed even greater virtues. Judson could not imagine what kind of achievement Edward would have if he did not have these sins. Of course, he could not imagine that these sins were more often necessary for the virtues he acquired. "Well, maybe not necessary but essential. It's a shame that we could not come to an understanding," said Edward as he slowly removed the gloves in his hand while transforming his cane into a wand. "And, I do not know if there are hardcore fans of The Librarian, but be warned that I only watched the movies and did some basic research on the series. So, the information I have is limited since the series is the one that completely fleshed out the lore of the story. Underscore 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 underscore. Chapter 237, Conversation. I know how powerful you are, but our duty in the library is to protect the world from going into chaos because of magic," said the librarian. "So, no matter the price, no matter the sacrifice, we have to stop you." All of these people knew that magic was slowly fading in this world. And in the current era, the number of real sorcerers in the world can be counted on one hand. This is the reason that magical artifacts are so sought after by many people, because of how powerful they are on their own and because anyone can use them. However, to their surprise, they found a powerful sorcerer that could probably rival the gods in ancient times. So, they were aware of the current situation. A sword suddenly flew from the back and landed in the librarian's hand. It was Arthur's sword, Excalibur. As for the woman next to him, black armor appeared on her body. "Is this Genghis Khan's armor?" Edward, but no one answered him. The librarian swung his sword, and a massive pillar of light enveloped Edward. The light pillar reached thousands of meters into the sky and could be seen by everyone in North America. More than 30 seconds later, the light faded away and Edward's body showed. Besides a few burn marks on his arm and face, he was completely intact. "Is this the magic immunity of Tier 6, he muttered. "Even such a powerful Tier 5 attack has little to no effect. No, this high level of immunity should be because of the crystal mana. The majority of Tier 6 mages should be more injured if hit with such a powerful attack." After talking to himself, he raised his head to see that the librarian who had just used this attack suddenly aged by more than a dozen years and became an old man. "Is the price paid to use Excalibur to such height?" said Edward calmly as he healed himself. Then, his right hand turned into a large quantity of sand to surround the librarian and his guardian. A shield came from the guardian's armor to protect her and the librarian. However, Edward had no intention of attacking but containing them. So, after enclosing the two into a dome of sand, he no longer attacked. After feeling the struggle of these two inside, he nodded in satisfaction. This sand elementalization spell was the result of studying Imhotep. Although the group has not found a way to permanently elementalize the body, the spells created in the process were of great use. Edward then looked at Judson and Charlene. "You know, using violence is usually my least favorite approach." "It does not matter what you do," said Charlene. "How so?" "Once I notice your arrival, I already sacrifice our immortality to break the chain of the library, making it disappear forever," replied Judson. Edward calmly raised his head to look behind the two. It did not disappear. "What do you mean?" "Your library exists in a separate dimension of its own. The chain that you broke is nothing but the connection of its dimension to the space here." "What are you trying to say?" asked Charlene. "Meaning that as long as I have the coordinate of the dimension where it is located, I can still be teleported there," replied Edward. The moment he entered the room he discovered the fact that this library was rapidly detaching itself from the current space. So, he contacted Morgana to quickly calculate the coordinate of the library dimension so that he could enter. And he just received notification from her. A white light then enveloped all five of them and they were teleported inside the library. Both Judson and Charlene were shocked once they realized where they were. Meanwhile, Edward had removed his sand dome, and the guardian was holding the librarian who was on the verge of death because of how much life span he sacrificed to activate Excalibur. Muttered Edward as he felt something. His eyes turned purple as he looked around. This library has some sort of consciousness acting like an AI. That makes things easier. Morgana, hack it and take control of it. "As you wish, boss," said the little purple-haired elf. The AI of the library was exactly like her, a magical artificial intelligence. So, she quickly launched a confrontation, and in just a few seconds, she was the winner. Compared to her, this AI was still way too inferior, not to mention that her main server was created from a very unique and powerful treasure. En "Master, I have taken control of the library and deactivated the self-destruction initiation." "Excellent. Put these four in prison before they calm down. Save the librarian as he might be useful later on." After that, Edward began to rapidly read the books inside. He did not touch the artifacts yet but asked Morgana to categorize them. Most of the books inside were magical books that contained curses inside them. Some of them were powerful artifacts themselves that contained powerful spells, and some contained the real history of the past. It took him a full week to read all the books inside. As a result, he furthered his understanding of this universe's magic system and the control of different energy. However, his greatest gain was some of the historical records. In one of the books, one sentence caught his attention. "The war in heaven brought the downfall of the gods." After further research, he was able to confirm one of his theories. A war occurred between the different pantheons of the gods that ended with the death of numerous gods and the severe injury of many. The Hebrew/Christian God, Yahweh, started a war against all other pantheons for the control of faith. This war, who started in the mortal world with the rise of Christianity, eventually affected heaven, which was the realm where the gods habited. However, from what Edward researched, he knew that this war was not as simple as he imagined, as much information was lost. Something seemed to have gone wrong in the process. Once he was done reading, Edward focused on the artifact, especially H.G. Wells' time machine. Unfortunately, this artifact was simply a better version of the time turner and could only slightly improve his time magic understanding. However, Edward was not disappointed as he had something better, the Book of Solomon. This was an artifact that allowed the user to manipulate space-time at will. Using the knowledge he had of the movie and some information in the library, he was quickly able to find Solomon's mine where the book was located. As for the Masons in charge of protecting the mine, they were only regular people and posed no threat. In the process, he also took the Spear of Destiny and Judas' Chalice. The spear contained a great deal of divine energy since the blood of Jesus, the Son of a God, once bathed in it. Nevertheless, his main focus has always been the book. He studied it religiously for the next few months. And after he was done, his ability to use time magic without any aid had drastically increased. Although he wanted to test out the new spells he created, he still had one important thing to do. So, he used the power of the book to bend space-time and contacted its creator, King Solomon. In a mirror that was in front of him, he saw a man with a crown and a very long white beard dressed in ancient clothes. The man was only momentarily surprised when he saw a circular passage appear in front of him to show someone on the other side. After looking at it for a while, Solomon said, "Some is using my book to communicate with me across space and time? How interesting." "Hello, King Solomon," said Edward with a smile. "What a powerful sorcerer," replied the king. "Moreover, one that used inner sorcery." Slight jealousy could be heard in Solomon's voice. As for Edward, he guessed that the inner sorcery was the same as forbidden sorcery that Imhotep talked about, meaning people who naturally have energy or mana inside their bodies. "So, young lad, why are you contacting a dead person like me?" "I just wanted to know some secrets of the past. However, I do not want to travel to the past to mess with the space-time continuum, so I thought that using your books to do so was the safest way." As wise as Solomon was, he understood Edward's implication. Messing with time can easily destroy the foundation of reality. So, Edward did not want to take risks. However, using the book drastically reduced the risks he had to take personally since Solomon, one of the greatest sorcerers who has existed in this world, created it. And if things did go wrong, he could deal with it as long as he destroyed the book. "So, what exactly do you want to know?" asked Solomon, not minded Edward's actions. "Many things. For example, why the gods have fallen, why magic is almost non-existent in my time. I'm also curious about you too. In such a world where magic is slowly dying, how did you become so powerful?" Just by reading the book, Edward could understand how powerful Solomon was in his prime. This was a tier 7 sorcerer, capable of destroying a star. _________________________________________________ Chapter 238, Too Clever. Solomon pondered for a moment before answering the question, as he did not mind. Given how powerful he was in his lifetime, he could have achieved much more. He could have attained immortality and traveled to the past and future. Yet, he did not do any of that and lived his normal mortal life. This was by choice. So, telling the secrets of the past to future generations is not a big deal to him. So, after organizing his thought properly, he responded. "The answers to your questions are all related. During my time, a battle took place between Yahweh and the other pantheons all over the world. Despite what modern people say, he was not the sole and supreme god but the head of a pantheon." Edward was not surprised that Solomon was aware of how Christianity evolved in modern times. After all, the current space-time power he was using was Solomon's power. It's completely normal for him to be able to look into the future and learn a few things. "I do not know much about the battle since it mainly took place in the heavens, however, I do know that things became complicated at some point because of outside influence. As a king under the banner of Yahweh, my job was to spread his name and faith in the mortal world to strengthen his power. The better a job I did, the happier my people became, the more faith they provided to him, and the more powerful he became. To better help to rule the mortal world, Yahweh granted me knowledge about sorcery. Since I was considered his champion, I could access a great deal of his power. However, as I study and understand sorcery, I became fascinated and wanted to uncover its secrets. Unfortunately, sorcery or any knowledge about it was strictly controlled by the gods. My obsession with sorcery displeased Yahweh, so he reduced the amount of power I could borrow from him. I did not like the fact that my power could be taken away at a moment's notice, so I began to search for knowledge regarding internal sorcery. Unfortunately, if there is one thing that all the gods agreed on was to prevent the rise of internal sorcerers, since they do not have to rely on anyone. Additionally, internal sorcery was innate and only a few people had the gift for it. Edward realized that internal sorcery was similar to wizards in his universe, only a few people were born with it. This world does not have mana in the environment, so people can't become mages. After I discovered this fact, I changed my plan. I first contacted Lucifer, who was the rebellious son of Yahweh, and made a contract with him to borrow his power, granting me the ability to summon demons. Then, I also contacted other gods of different pantheons to make contracts with so that Yahweh could not take away my power when he felt like it. After hearing this, Edward smiled knowingly. How could things be as simple as Solomon stated? Normally, only by having faith in one deity could a sorcerer make a contract with it. Yet, Solomon, who was associated with Yahweh, made contracts with other gods? How did he convince them to agree to such a thing? How did he manage to sign multiple contracts without his soul being affected? And after the other gods discovered that he had so many contracts, so much power, why did they not punish him? Obviously, Solomon used his wisdom to place himself in the middle ground of the confrontation of these gods to benefit himself. And with a war going on, Edward could imagine the finesse this kind of maneuver would require. This alone shows how intelligent this old man was, not to mention how deep his understanding of the soul was to be able to contain that many contracts. Edward understood why Solomon is known as one of the wisest men that ever lived. Part of him thought that the Bible did somewhat glorify the ability of this man. "What was the result of the war?" asked Edward. "Before I die, Yahweh's pantheon still had the advantage despite fighting many pantheons at the same time. However, as I said before, things seemed to become complicated at some point. Edward opened his mouth to ask something when he felt a sudden change in Solomon. His calm demeanor that resembled a wise old man suddenly became mighty and supreme. It was as if he was the noblest and most powerful being in existence. Edward immediately became solemn and on guard as he looked at the completely different old man in front of him, despite his visage not having changed in the slightest. After hesitating for a moment, he asked, "Are you the real Solomon?" "Ha ha ha ha," laughed Solomon. "Worthy of Merlin's apprentice. However, your understanding of the real and unreal is too superficial. All the versions of me that exist across the multiverse of the current universe, or all the universes that exist in the void where I existed or once existed and their counterparts in their respective multiverse, they are all me." Edward frowned after hearing this as his mind rapidly functioned. According to his theory, one way to become a Tier 11 multiversal arcanist is to absorb or have control of all the different versions of himself in the multiverse. That way, even if the original body is destroyed, as long as one of his infinite selves exists in the multiverse, he can resurrect himself. And after meeting Old Man Merlin and knowing of his existence across the Omegaverse, he theorized about possible future tiers. Maybe one day, he will have to spread his legend and existence across multiple other universes. That way, he will become an existence with numerous clones in multiple universes. As long as one of these clones or separate parts of him exists, he will essentially be immortal or eternal. Only if someone or something was powerful enough to erase him across all realities where he existed could he possibly be killed. So, after hearing Solomon's words, he realized that his theory was probably correct. After thinking about this, his eyes suddenly became more brilliant as the path forward was seen by him. So, he said to Solomon, "Thank you for your guidance." Solomon sighed, "You are much better than my stupid apprentice." "You also have an apprentice?" "Yes. He's someone like you who was reincarnated from primordial Earth." Edward frowned after hearing this. He was not concerned about the fact that Solomon's apprentice was also a reincarnator like himself. From Merlin, he knew that there were many like him. What caught his attention was the fact that both Merlin and Solomon have accepted this disciple. To Edward, this felt like something was wrong. "Sir Solomon, why are you and the old man suddenly beginning to accept apprentices?" Solomon paused for a moment before sighing. "You know, sometimes, being too clever is not necessarily a good thing." Immediately, Edward knew that his guess was correct. Something must have happened that made all these big shots accept disciples and train more powerful people. There is the possibility that they are facing some unknown threat that requires more people to deal with. Thinking about this, a sense of urgency suddenly overcame him. "There is no need for you to be worried. At your current level, there is nothing you could do about it," said Solomon calmly. "How strong would I have to be to start worrying?" asked Edward. He likes to be prepared for the worst. "All I can say is that even if you reach Tier 11, you will be nothing but cannon fodder." From this single sentence, Edward could gather a lot of information. The terms cannon fodder could be alluding to a war that these big shots are fighting, and even a Tier 11 multiversal individual is nothing in said war. After taking a deep breath to calm down, he said, "Thank you." He did not ask any more questions. Although he was curious by nature, he also understood that sometimes, you have to reach a certain level to know some secrets, otherwise it will be detrimental. Plus, he did not think that Solomon would say anything more. See, there is no need. "You, youngsters, are the future," said Solomon. Then, he took a glowing ball from his hand. "This is my gift to you." The ball appeared in front of Edward, then, after hesitating for a moment, he took it. Immediately, countless memories appeared in his mind. These memories were the films, manga, anime, and many other things that came after his death in 2019. Inside, he even saw the movie that both Frank and Lilith came from called Jungle Cruise. It's not really precious, but it will save you a lot of money," said Solomon. However, after seeing the confused look on Edward's face, he further explained. "If you successfully manage to reach the Akashic records, you can easily gain access to these memories. However, you have to pay for them." Edward nodded and was not surprised that the latter knew that he was trying to reach the Akashic record. By now, he guessed how powerful these big shots were. If he did not have Merlin as his backer, he would have run away the moment Solomon appeared. So, after chatting for a brief moment with the king, he closed the space-time connection. Meanwhile, right after Edward ended his conversation with Solomon, an old man suddenly appeared in front of Solomon. Chapter 239, Another Reincarnator. "Solomon, why are you intervening in my affairs?" said Merlin with a deep frown on his face. "I didn't do anything," replied the wise king. "You should not have said anything to him about the war. How would you like it if I intervened with how you raise your apprentice?" Solomon was quiet for a moment. "Well, I apologize. You're right, I was out of line in my actions. How about erasing his memory or at least sealing it?" Merlin shook his head as he knew Edward's temperament the best. If he did that, this would eventually lead to a contradiction between the two of them. So, he sighed, "It seems that I have been a little too lax. From now on, whatever world he goes to, I will block it to prevent any of you from intervening." After saying that, Merlin disappeared. As for Solomon, he was quiet for a moment. He was indeed out of line, but that was how he did things. Since he felt that Edward was talented and knew what he would be facing in the future, he decided to give him a heads up. This would better prepare for the future. However, he also realized that he had broken some major rules by intervening with another aspect's disciple. Luckily, Merlin was a more peaceful person, otherwise this could lead to serious trouble. Of course, as wise as Solomon was, the reason he acted so recklessly was that he took into account Merlin's personality and character. Solomon looked in the distance as he thought to himself, time is running out for these youngsters. If they cannot grow quickly, we may not be able to hold on for long. After that, his consciousness left this version of himself in this time and space. He appeared in a parallel universe in the World of Warcraft universe. Quel'Thala's, a magic tower. Solomon walked into one of the rooms inside the tower where a handsome elf was reading a book. He seemed startled when he saw someone barged into his tower without activating any of the magical traps. Master, how many times have I told you to not sneak up on me? And how many times have I told you that I am testing your alertness, replied Solomon. The handsome elf sighed and decided not to argue with this eccentric old man who likes to use strange methods to teach life lessons. So, to what do I owe your visit this time? Disciple, I have some bad news for you. Suddenly, the handsome elf had a feeling that he was about to suffer terribly. Knowing how his master operated, this bad news was most likely catastrophic to him. What is it this time? I have decided to seal most if not all the functions of your system, said Solomon with a smile on his face. What? Said the handsome elf as he stood up from his chair. After being reincarnated into this terrible world, he relied on this system to become one of the most powerful mages in this world, wielding the power of arcane unlike anybody has ever seen. Now, this old man who became his master just said that he would seal it away and take away all the power and convenience that it provided him. I'm sorry, my favorite disciple. Recently, I met the disciple of another old friend of mine, and just like you, he also came from primordial Earth. However, he was not as lucky as you to have such a powerful cheat-like thing as a system. Yet, so far, his achievements have surpassed you by too much. So, I decided to push you so that you can further develop your potential, said Solomon. The handsome elf gritted his teeth after hearing this. Reo. Old man, I'm fighting with you. Although he said this, he did not dare to do so as he remembered the first time he met his cheap master. Even with the so-called invincible mode of his system, he was almost slapped to death. It was that experience that humbled him and made him realize how vast the world truly was. Furthermore, continued Solomon, although I will not seal your system's ability to travel to other universes, I'm giving you 10 years to create a method of your own that can accomplish the same thing. If you fail, that part will also be sealed and you will be stuck in this universe for a very long time. Master, how can you be so unreasonable? Solomon sighed, disciple, this is easier than you think. All you have to do is study how your system travels to other universes and replicate it. Or, you can use the Titan of this world since they also developed omniverse travel technology. Some people manage to do with less. Are you talking about the disciple of your old friend? Asked the handsome elf with gritted teeth. Solomon looked at his apprentice with his deep eyes full of wisdom. Look at your current state, you look like someone whose world has been shattered. You have been too reliant on this system that you have no confidence in doing anything without it. Many times, I've told you to use it as nothing but a tool to help you in your magical path, but you never listen to me. With such a mindset, you will never become a truly powerful mage. The handsome elf had a look of shock on his face after hearing his master's words, and a sudden realization dawned on him, his master was right. With the system, he could learn most magic spells or theories instantly, he could optimize them and make them better. It was easier for him to create new spells and invent new technology. Additionally, he could travel to other universes to acquire new knowledge and learn different magic systems. Because of it, in just a few short decades, he became a demigod in this world, even more powerful than Egwene. Not to mention the fact that he could accomplish his dream of being together with the anime waifu that he idolized in his previous life. One could say that with the system, he has wealth, power, and women. However, because of this, he had become over-reliant on it, especially after he met his master Solomon, and the latter told him about the fact that his system was not the machination of some powerful entity, but a natural gift or talent that he had because he was from primordial Earth. As the handsome elf taught about all of this, he realized the deeper issue of his over-reliance on this system. His master told him about the things he has to face in the future. As a result of this, he was instantly overcome with fear, thinking how bleak things would be for him. So, he wanted something to rely on to give him strength, to give him some assurance. Despite the fact that his master told him that his system would become useless after he reached a certain level, he did not want to believe it. After all, that would mean that he had to rely on himself. Honestly, at his core, the handsome elf did not think he was special. In his previous life, he was nothing but an ordinary weeb. So, deep in his mind, he always believed that he was nothing without the system. After thinking about all of this, the handsome elf had a look of determination on his face. This was the opportunity to gain his confidence, to prove to himself that even without a system, he could still achieve great things in his life. Master, you can seal it. And don't worry, I will not disappoint your expectations. Solomon smiled after hearing this. How could the disciple who was chosen by himself be simple? Maybe his disciple may not know what is special about him, but Solomon was fully aware of how strong the mind of his disciple was. Among many of his peers, a lot of them have now accepted disciples, and many of them told their disciples about the future that they would face. And from what Solomon knows, all these people had no choice but to erase or seal the memories of their disciples once they learned the truth. And many of these disciples have cheat-like abilities that are even more powerful than his disciples' system, yet, the latter was among the few that knew the truth and accepted it without almost collapsing. Because of this situation, many other people like Merlin opted not to tell their disciples the truth, for now, waiting for the right time and opportunity. I knew that you would not disappoint me, said Solomon as he waved his hand to place a magical seal on a golden light deep inside his disciple's soul. Then, he disappeared from this universe. He was a busy man, so he could not babysit his disciple during his growth. Chapter 240, Chronomancy. Edward spent the next month reviewing all the information that Solomon gave him, and he truly enjoyed the process. During this time, he reverted back to the nerd he was in his previous life instead of the powerful wizard/emperor of his current self. He watched all the movies and anime that came out from 2019 to 2023, he read all the mangas and comics. And in the process, he praised Solomon for being so detailed in his selection. And the thing that made him even happier was that he could finally see what happened to Phase 4 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The last thing he watched before his death was the movie Endgame. He geeked out when he saw all three Spider-Mans in the No Way Home. He marveled at how powerful Wanda had become in the movies. Although she was always terrifying in the comics, he was glad to see her beginning to display her full potential. At the same time, he lusted greatly after chaos magic. When Edward watched What If, he was very excited to see the magical world of the MCU further fleshed out. Then, there were all the other shows that he also enjoyed, including Loki and the TVA. He began to worry whether things would become complicated if he entered the Marvel world in the future. After that, he focused on DC movies including The Flash, Aquaman 2, Black Adams, and the Shazam movie. Although he was not as big of a fan of DC in terms of the movies, comics-wise, he was also a big fan. So, he was glad to see them doing well. So, after a month of being a complete weeb or shut in, Edward finally left his room. All he could think about was what would be the next world he will go to, given the ability to choose, and he had an idea of where to go next. Plus, he also had to add the MCU in his future, as this is one of the worlds where he could grow rapidly given the right opportunity and plan. After reviewing the things that occurred in Phase 4, he had many wild ideas that he wanted to try. Once Edward was done focusing on the future, he placed his attention on further studying Solomon's book. Inside a room of the floating city, he began a few tests. In front of him was a normal human clone. He pointed his hand to use a newly created spell. Arcane rune spell, Curse of Youth. A gray magic circle appeared in front of the clone, which contained a powerful space-time force that immediately began to act on it. Then, the clone that looked like he was in his 50s suddenly began to age backward until he became a baby, a fetus, then ceased to exist. This spell was not a real time reversal spell but more of an application of it. Through a curse, Edward could achieve the same effect of reversing time. The main difference is that time reversal is permanent, whereas in the Curse of Youth, as long as someone breaks the curse, the effect will be stopped and reverted back. He pointed at another clone and used the Curse of Aging. And this time, the clone aged until he became an old man and died naturally. Afterward, he used another time spell on a third clone. Arcane rune magic, Delay. The clone that he instructed to attack him suddenly started to move very slowly. It was as if he was in a quagmire and his every action was hindered. After seeing this, Edward nodded in satisfaction. Morgana, send in an army of clones and golems. Yes, boss. Then, an army of more than 10,000 clones and golems appeared in the room and rushed towards Edward. The majority of them were armed with modern guns. Some of them were driving tanks, helicopters, and fighter planes. A large gray magic circle appeared underneath the foot of this army. Then, everything stopped. Their forward movement, the bullets that they shot, and even their facial expressions remained the same the moment the spell activated. Edward walked between these frozen people as he observed them. He touched the bullets that stopped moving and saw the fire sparks that occurred once the tank fired. He flew into the sky as he observed the rotor blade of the helicopter stopped moving, and yet, the thing was still standing in the air. Edward walked inside and saw the determined look of the pilot as he prepared to fire a few missiles. Is this the power of time? How fascinating, muttered Edward. Sometimes, he marveled at how powerful he has become. From an ordinary 9-to-5 office worker, to a talented wizard in the Harry Potter world, to now, a Tier 6 arcanist that can not only destroy a planet but also control time. Based on his current power, in many places or worlds, he would be considered a god. Of course, Edward did not become arrogant because of this accomplishment, as he knew that he still had a long way to go, especially as he guessed what awaited him from Solomon's words. Although he had to seal these thoughts deep in his subconsciousness to prevent his paranoia to get the best of him. After using the time stop spell on this army, Edward began to test the limit of his new understanding of time magic. And in the end, he was not satisfied with the result. For once, he could only stop time for an army of 215,000 people. That was the limit. Any more than that, the spell will not work. Additionally, his spell only works on tier 3 individuals. And the more advanced tiers of individuals there is, the less number of people the spell will work on. When it comes to tier 4 or higher, it can only work on tier 4 or a master, as they seem to have a lower tolerance or resistance to time magic. Of course, Edward can use the floating city to boost his time magic abilities. However, his purpose in studying Solomon's book was to control time magic on his own without any aid. After that, Edward continued his test. He stood in front of a medium-sized city. He raised his hand to cast a spell, arcane rune spell, earthquake. The entire city shook as if it was experiencing an 11-magnitude earthquake. Following this, everything was destroyed in the process. All the buildings and houses fell on one another. Luckily, there was not a single living being inside. Once that was done, Edward took out his wand and cast another spell, time reversal. Then, the entire city began to function like a videotape that was rewinding. In just a few seconds, the city returned to its pristine state as if nothing occurred. Enov. Edward waved his hand and a clone was sent to a random house in the city. He once again destroyed it with a spell and cast a time reversal on it. However, this time, nothing occurred. Just because of the dead clone, the spell failed and time could not be reverted back, thought Edward with a frown on his face. He has done previous experiments like this, and even with his gate or city as aid, he could not revert time to bring someone back to life, even a clone. Every time he tried, he felt tremendous resistance. After pondering for a moment, he no longer focused on this problem for now and continued on his final test. He tried to move time forward in the entire city. And he succeeded, somewhat. His purpose in using this spell was to instantly turn the entire city into rust because of the passage of time. Unfortunately, he underestimated the amount of mana required to move time forward. So, after aging the city by 30 years, his man ran out. It seems that I have to go to that world. It is the easiest way for me to learn advanced applications of time magic, muttered Edward. After that, he headed for the room next door. After entering, he saw a corpse lying on a dissecting table. Not far from him was a flying saucer that looked like a UFO. There was no problem taking these things, asked Edward. Since you already warned me, I took precautions and no one was even aware of its arrival, replied Morgana. Excellent, said Edward as he looked at the alien life form in front of him with an elongated head. Interdimensional beings, muttered Edward with excitement. This discovery is probably second in terms of value after the Book of Solomon. After saying that, he began to study the physiology of this creature and its technology. He knew that the real benefit from this creature was in Akator, where their main ship is located and where their leaders are. However, before heading there, he had to prepare a little. Chapter 241, Interdimensional Beings. Once Edward finished his dissection, he learned a few things from these interdimensional beings that exist in the space between spaces. He reviewed the information he gathered. What interesting species, he muttered. For one, he discovered that interdimensional beings are a psychic species with tremendous latent psychic energy in their brains. They usually use it for communication with other species and themselves, along with other things. The second main discovery is that their bodies are very adaptable or conductive to space-time energy. This is probably the result of their natural evolution as species that survived in the space between dimensions. Their bodies are perfect for making time-related magical items, muttered Edward as he reviewed the life code of this species. Plus, with them, the Empire's development of psychic energy will take a great leap forward. Narcissa and Soleil have been developing psychic energy for many years, and they have made great progress. However, compared to other fields that have other knowledge to help them, their progress is quite mediocre in comparison. However, after bringing the specimen of this species to them along with their knowledge, they should be able to develop more rapidly. Then, there is the development of genetic technology once these aliens' bodies are thoroughly studied. Finally, Edward wrote down the value of these species and possible direction development that they can provide then. Then, he preserved the specimen before entering the flying saucer. How is it going? Did you discover anything? A few things, replied Morgana. Their technology tree is a combination of psychic energy and pure technology. The main engine of this ship seems to be a very wise and intricate use of black holes to travel from dimension to dimension. However, I have not completely deciphered it yet. Controlled black holes, muttered Edward. How long will it take you to completely reverse engineer their technology? Honestly, it will take some time. Oh, is there a problem? Yes. The information inside this flying saucer is very limited. From my observation, it is similar to some of the Navy fleet. Although they contain powerful technology, the information regarding said technology is not on the ship's system. Additionally, after the crash, the main system initiated the self-destruction system and removed a lot of information or parts crucial to these creatures' technology. Most likely a failsafe left to prevent others from reverse engineering it. Edward pondered for a moment. In that case, we will have to rely on the ship that is in Akator. Can we block space to prevent them from using interdimensional travel? With the Empire's current study in black holes, it should not be a problem to block them for a while. That's good enough. Where is the crystal skull? Soon after he said these words, a crystal skull appeared in front of him. Based on the clues Edward provided from his memories of the last Indiana Jones movie, Morgana was able to fetch the skull that was located in Peru. She even found the location of Akator where the owner of the skull is located. Call the others, I need them in case something goes wrong, said Edward. A few minutes later, he saw the three of them coming to see him. Based on their faces, obviously, they were not happy about being disturbed. With just one look, Edward could tell that all of them were very close to reaching Tier 6. In just a few years, they should succeed. I'm sorry for disturbing all of you, but I need your help. Then, Edward explained the situation to them. Once everyone was ready, the group headed to Akator in the Amazon.fl. cm. After meeting the Uga tribes that protected the temple, Edward read their minds to learn their language and communicate with them. After a few lies and showing them the skull, he managed to get their understanding. Then, he and the group placed dimension lock enchantment around the entire temple, which was a ship. Finally, Edward did the same on the crystal skull in his hand. After analyzing this thing, he knew that a small piece of a soul was inside. So, he prepared beforehand. Once everything was done, he entered the temple to the room where all the interdimensional beings sat on their chairs with one of them missing his head. Edward placed the skull in its rightful place and waited. Things proceeded exactly like in the movie. These beings began to activate, then, one of them used a psychic link to communicate with Edward, telling him that they would reward him for bringing the skull back to him. And just like in the movie, just like Dr. Spocko asked, Edward said that he wanted to know everything, including all the knowledge of their species. And these interdimensional beings acquiesced to his demand. Unfortunately, they made a grave error. Unlike Spocko, Edward's mind did not have a limit to the amount of knowledge it could contain. So, these beings' attempt at overwhelming him with too much information was useless. Not to mention that Edward had Morgana's help. Once they discovered these, they tried to remove their connection. Unfortunately, by then, it was not under their control as Edward had already used the enchantment he placed on the crystal skull to invade their mind and soul. As a hive mind species, the process was easier than anticipated because as long as one of them was infected, it was also easier to affect the others through their connections. Meanwhile, these interdimensional beings also discovered that they could not return home as the space where they are located was blocked by a powerful force. Immediately, they recognized that power, sorcery. They wanted to initiate countermeasures to deal with the situation, but it was already too late. Edward had already got the knowledge he wanted, so he snapped his finger and that being fainted. The psychic power inside his mind was sealed and his soul entered a dormant state. And without him, the spaceship also stopped activating. It seems that I was lucky, muttered Edward as he reviewed the information inside his mind. These interdimensional beings who called themselves Novad were partially responsible for the downfall of the gods in this universe. After coming here, at first, they remained neutral in the conflict. However, many of the gods did not like them spreading knowledge to mortals and opening their wisdom. So, they were forced to enter the war. They were the outside influence that Solomon talked about. Once the Novad participated in this war, it became a three-way war. In the end, all the other pantheons were destroyed or severely injured, leaving only Yahweh and the Novad. In the final battle, the two were severely injured and entered a state of recuperating. Then, their conflict focused more on the mortal plane. Yahweh wanted to gather faith while the Novad spread technology to prevent humans from relying on the gods. In the end, it could be said that the Novads were the final winner, but things were not so simple. Currently, there are over 100 million Christians all over the world. And if this world continues to develop similarly to Earth, the number will reach more than 2 billion by the 2010s. This Yahweh is not a simple God. Should I intervene in the growth of Christianity, otherwise he might intervene in my plans? Edward's mind rushed as a plan began to brew inside his mind. However, he placed these thoughts in the back of his mind for now as he had other things to attain. He walked to the Novad king in front of him. According to information he knew, the Novad species reproduced sexually like humans and also had classification between them. The kings and queens in the species were born with tremendous psychic energy and had a very high status among their kind. One of the main reasons for that is they also could split themselves into many nomads clones that were linked psychically. This was the reason that there were 13 of them in the room when Edward came in. And these 13 were not the only ones, they were only the main ones. As for the rest, they were destroyed during the war, hence the reason that this Novad king was injured. As for the one that Edward previously captured and dissected, he was a warrior-class Novad sent into this world because the Novad king stopped sending reports back to their race. They wanted to check whether something had happened to him. Edward took a drop of blood from the fused Novad that no longer looked like a crystal skeleton, then he used a spell to copy this species' DNA and soul, then turn into its appearance. Then, he converted a lot of his mana into psychic energy before entering the spaceship. That way, he was able to pass as the Novad king and easily gained access to it. Underscore 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 underscore. Chapter 242, Novad Technology. After entering the Nova ship, Edward quickly disarmed the artificial intelligence inside and had Morgana replace it. Then, he brought the ship back to the floating city. Before leaving, he repaired the destroyed temple and placed it inside a pocket dimension. The reason for doing so was to repay the Uga tribe that lived there and protect them. From what he remembered from the movie, these people were killed by the Soviets. After all, he basically stole their gods after they treated him quite nicely. This was the least he could do. Edward still knew the concept of repaying kindness to others. As for the reason he did not bring them with him, it's because the chief of the tribe said that they did not want their lives to be disturbed and that they were perfectly happy with their way of life. After leaving Akator, Edward began to use the knowledge inside his mind to study the technology of the Novads. And it was a fascinating discovery. A black hole is a known phenomenon in the universe. However, one question surrounding it is what happened to all the things that a black hole swallows? Well, Edward finally knows the answer. It goes to a place called the blank realm, or the space between spaces as it was referred to in the Indiana Jones. Essentially, it is the space that exists between dimensions, and also the place where the Novad race was born and evolved. The Novad race has mastered black hole technology and can reverse the suction force of the black hole to travel from the blank space to other dimensions and parallel universes. The blank realm does not only exist between dimensions but also between parallel universes, between different timelines. Immediately, Edward called the others and used the ship to enter the blank realm. A few minutes later, Edward found himself floating into a dark gray space with little many things in sight. After a quick scan of the surroundings, the group discovered countless matters, stars, and even galaxies. All of these things were once swallowed by a black hole in the infinite universe. This space is the perfect place to gather more resources, said Hermione, thinking about how much the Empire will benefit from this technology. Indeed. However, we should be very careful, added Lily. The life forms who lived in this place are either evolved from this area or strong enough to survive being swallowed by a black hole. That's true. However, there is no need to focus on this for now, said Edward. What I'm most excited about Novad's technology is their information gathering system. Edward pressed a few buttons and a picture of Earth. On the screen was written Earth 234. They have found a way to categorize each parallel universe and labeled them using a technology that they called frequency reading, continued Edward as he explained the general technology to the rest. Everything in the universe has its own frequency, including each dimension and parallel universes. The Novad invented a way to use psychic energy to read the frequency of the parallel universe and gather basic information. The basic information involved what time period the universe is, whether it has magic or not, along with other basic information. Although this kind of information seemed basic, it is of great importance to Edward when it comes to studying and navigating the multiverse. For example, the mission he sent Rowena and Luna on. The reason that this mission is so difficult is that these two have to constantly jump into different parallel universes at random. Although they have Luna's divination to help, her ability is greatly reduced when it comes to the scale of the multiverse. If it was not because of her seer bloodline and the help of the gate, she would probably be useless in this search. But now, things were different. With this new technology, it will be more efficient for them to search different timelines. Additionally, there are a few other applications of the Novad technology. For one, the Empire can now use black holes for faster-than-light travel. In case the apparition drive, the void drive, and other technology fail, this is a solution. Second, black holes can also be used as a form of energy. Many advanced civilizations used it for this. Additionally, once weaponized, black holes are Tier 9 galaxy-level technology with the potential to grow to higher tiers. Finally, Edward will be able to communicate with Rowena and Luna much easier. Of course, what he's most excited about is interdimensional capable. Just like in Rick and Morty, he will connect his television to capable across the multiverse so that he watches shows from different realities. If he ever watched a show that was cancelled, he could switch to another reality where this show was renewed for another season. Or if the show had a terrible season, he could switch to another reality where they did something different. Thinking about the endless possibilities, Edward became excited. You're thinking about something weird again, aren't you? Said Hermione. Not weird, innovative. After that, Edward looked at the coordinates of the different parallel universes that the Novad King had. He wanted to find one with magic, and to his surprise, it took quite some time to find one. It seems that magic is weakened throughout the multiverse, said Snape. Everyone nodded in agreement with him. Are we leaving now? Asked Hermione. No, we still have many unfinished businesses on Earth 125. We can go later once everything is done. After that, everyone dispersed to continue their own study. Meanwhile, Edward focused on his study of Novad technology. He wanted to transfer some of their research into magic. A few years later, Edward floated in front of a deserted planet the size of Jupiter. He pointed his hand. Arcane rune spell, black hole. A small black hole appeared and swallowed the deserted planet in an instant. However, the planet was not sent to the blank realm but to a pocket dimension in the floating city.ru. cm. After that, Edward teleported to the nearest star and used the same attack. This time, he used a large quantity of his mana to increase both the size and the swallowing ability of the black hole. And in over 30 seconds, he managed to swallow the entire star. Although I'm only tier 6, I can still use tier 7 star level attack. This is the advantage that knowledge can give casters over others. After doing his test, Edward returned to Earth as he was mostly done with studying the technology of the Novad and placing the information in his library. The only thing that he did not do was completely analyze the life code of the Novad king as he was waiting for when he returned to the Empire and have more professional do so. However, based on the basic tests he did, he discovered that not only was this species born with extraordinary psychic energy and talent but also for space-time magic. Most likely because of where they were born and evolved. Once a complete study was finished, he planned to modify his life code to enhance his talent in both these areas. Plus, he thought that the Novad king was a perfect species to be in charge of the Empire's time order and prevent people from messing with history. So, he did not plan to kill him and even planned to capture a few other of their races. However, the Novad in general was a powerful race, so he had to be careful. After returning to Earth, Edward headed to one specific room with a large magic circle in the middle. Hermione was checking it to make sure that everything was working smoothly while Lily and Snape were on guard. After Edward arrived, he asked, "Is everything ready?" "There is no problem." "Then, let's begin." Hermione nodded her head before activating her talent along with the magic circle. However, after the circle lit up slightly, it immediately became dim afterward. "Fail?" asked Edward. "No, a rejection. Try a few more times with different people." Hermione nodded before trying again. However, for the next 10 trials, it was the same responses. "Well, these gods are truly arrogant beyond measure," complained Snape. "Well, they are gods after all," said Lily. "In the state that they are in, can they be arrogant? Can they be picky? No matter how powerful we are, in their eyes, we are nothing but mortal. It's best to get used to their arrogance now to not suffer in the future," said Edward, who had experienced dealing with Herpo. He knew how divinity forcibly changed the personality of these gods who relied on faith. Even if any of them were once mortal, they would still look down on other people. After a few dozens try, someone finally answered their calls and appeared in the summoning circle. Chapter 243, Dirty Deal. A young man dressed in a black robe appeared in the middle of the circle. His appearance was extremely pale, as if he was sick and on the verge of dying. His eyes scanned around as he looked at the magic circle on the ground with a frown. Then, a smile appeared on his face as he looked at the group. Although he was surprised after landing his eyes on Edward, he did not show it. "So, it is you guys who summoned me. To what I owe this pleasure?" "Who are you?" asked Edward directly, as he did not recognize this person. Most likely because he was a minor god not overtly known to the general population, so not easily recognizable by certain traits. "My name is Dolus Frenu, the Greek god of lies and deception," muttered Edward. "How exactly did such a weak god like you manage to survive the war?" "From what I know, the Greek pantheon was forced to change its names and reinvent itself to Roman in an attempt to survive. However, I doubt a minor godlike would have such an opportunity." The smile on Dolus' face remained the same. "This sorcerer is not only powerful but also quite knowledgeable of the past. This may be a little tricky." "I have my own methods," replied Dolus. "Yes, as a god whose divinity revolves around trickery and cunningness, you should have your own method. Although you are no Loki, you should not be too bad." As soon as the word Loki was mentioned, Dolus' smiling facade was almost broken. Obviously, that name was a sore spot for him. And this slight change did not escape Edward's sight as he was closely observing this god in front of him. Additionally, he mentioned Loki on purpose to see his reaction. After all, as both gods of trickery, as two people who share the same authority, Edward did not think that these two would get along since they were competitors. Adding to that the fact that Loki is way more popular and known than Dolus, this only showed that in their confrontation, the Greek god was at a disadvantage. "So, for what reasons have you summoned me here?" asked Dolus, who forced himself to regain his calm, collected, and trustworthy smiling face. "No, the question is, why did you accept our summon?" said Edward, a question which made Dolus frown as he realized that the situation was different than he expected. He thought that some mortal had come across some summoning magic and was using it recklessly. So, he believed that this was an opportunity for him to leave his hiding place and use the situation to recuperate his power. However, after seeing Edward and how powerful of an internal sorcerer he was, he did not change his plan. He just thought that it would only be slightly more difficult to trick this sorcerer and his companion. Regrettably, based on the brief conversation, he knew that his opponent might also be a master of negotiation and manipulation. Adding to their wariness and strength, a different approach was necessary. So, Dolus removed his smiling face and became calm to the point of indifference. "Let's not go around the bush. State your purpose directly." "Fine," said Edward as he waved his hand to manifest a white crystal, which then floated to Dolus inside the magic circle. I want to exchange knowledge from you with this. The Greek god looked at the crystal for a few seconds before swallowing it. Then, he frowned before saying, "Crystallized soul?" However, the quality of the soul is terrible, although slightly better than animals, it's not even on par with ordinary humans. Dolus was right since the crystal was made from clones. I can exchange with you, but the souls used have to be made of ordinary people. No, replied Edward. Only these. Plus, I can only give you 10 million, nothing more nothing less. Dolus frowned after hearing this. With the quality of these souls, 10 million was enough to recover a lot of his injuries but not enough to recover to his peak. Obviously, this was a calculated number. However, after thinking about it for a while, Dolus decided to accept the deal because he knew that if he did not, some other gods will. Fine. Edward waved his hand and a magical contract flew to him. Dolus looked at it and the first thing he did was to remove all the beautiful designs on the paper that looked like nothing but decorations. As a trickster god, these were basic operations when tricking people into contracts. Then, he used a spell on the paper, then, the one-page contract suddenly turned into a long parchment the length of a football field. These were all the hidden clauses of this contract that looked so simple. Then, Dolus read every single paragraph one by one while changing the clauses that he did not agree with while adding some of his. Once he was done, he sent it back to Edward who also reviewed all the clauses. However, after the review, he only cares about two things. The first one was the fact that Dolus refused to grant him all his knowledge for the price Edward was offering. Instead, he made a list of things he could exchange for. Edward did not hesitate to choose knowledge about the soul and how to cast the divine fire and soul. Article 1567, Clause C, is non-negotiable, said Edward. Then, you might as well cancel the deal, said Dolus with a sneer. I managed to survive this war, do you think I would become enemy with Yahweh now? I don't ask you to become enemies with him. Just attack him once at the right time. Same thing. In that case, how about I change the clause for simple information regarding his current state? I'm sure as cautious as you are, you have gathered a great deal of information about him. Dolus remained quiet, seeming deep in thought. I'll add another 1,000,000 souls. However, that's all I can offer you. Deal. After that, the two negotiated a few more things before they both signed the contract. Dolus was slightly surprised once everything was done. He thought that he could sacrifice a little bit of his power to break some clauses of the contract. Unfortunately, he discovered that this contract was overseen by the will of all the planets in the solar system. If he broke it, the backlash was enough to kill him. So, after receiving his payment, he also gave Edward all the knowledge and information he promised. Then, he disappeared. I still think that we should have forcefully captured him, said Snape. With how weak this guy is and with the floating city, it should be quite easy. I think caution was the best approach, retorted Lily. This world still has too many unknown to us. She's right, added Edward. So far, we still do not know to what extent some of the gods have recovered. We do not even know how many of them have survived the war and how many have died. After that, Edward began to review the knowledge that Dolus gave him. His eyes became bright as he muttered, I think I found a shortcut to reaching Tier 7. The eyes of the other became bright as they looked at him with excitement. As the most talented arcanists in the Empire, these people knew how long it would take them to reach higher tiers. Hundreds of years. Even with a magical potion like the Divine Essence Potion, it would still take them dozens of years. And that's only Tier 6 not to mention Tier 7. However, if there was a quicker way, that would be perfect. Edward then explained the method he just thought of. One of the information that Dolus gave him was regarding how gods lighted up their divine flame and its function. The divine flame is an application of the soul to condense it and form a spiritual flame. However, that spiritual flame is not for fighting or other things, it is used to remove the impurities in faith. It is common knowledge to all the gods that faith is poisonous. Overabsorption of it can corrupt the soul and change the personality of the gods. The solution to this problem is to remove the impurities that faith contained with the divine flame and make it safer to absorb or relatively safer. After knowing this, Edward immediately thought of using the divine flame to purify the mana inside arcanists to make it reach higher purity. His theory is that since crystallized mana which was of higher quality was enough to allow arcanists to reach higher tiers, then a high purity of mana could do the same. Let's go test this out right now, said Hermione. Alright. Chapter 244, Purification. Edward immediately began to experiment with the divine flame and whether it can successfully purify mana and help him quickly achieve higher tiers. After entering one of the experimental rooms, he began. Immediately, after a few tests on many clones, he discovered that Tier 5 below individuals could not light up the divine fire, their souls were too weak to sustain it and would disintegrate. So, Edward had to spend a lot of resources to quickly train Tier 6 clones for the experiment. Then, that clone used the method given by Dolus to light up the divine fire. Looking at the bright golden flame in front of him, Edward nodded in satisfaction. Then, he began the next step of the experiment. He did not immediately begin with the Tier 6 clone but used a Tier 0 instead. And the process was much easier than anticipated. The divine flame's sole purpose seemed to purify things. So, after coming into contact with the Tier 0 clone's mana, a reaction was quickly formed. Mana is unseen to the naked eye and not easily detected. However, using a special method, it can be observed and studied. And based on the Empire's research, mana is usually manifested in blue color. This is most obvious when a great deal of it is concentrated or mobilized by an individual. However, after the divine flame began to purify the clone's mana, it changed color from blue to orange, then yellow, then silver, before turning completely white. And each color represented a tier. Orange for Tier 1, yellow for Tier 2, silver for Tier 3, and white for Tier 4. Edward realized that he was slowly discovering something. So, he quickly checked the liquid mana of Tier 4 arcanists. Before, the concept of purity in mana was discussed in the Empire and studied, but there has been little to no result. However, now, with this recent discovery, Edward could identify the purity of mana. After checking the liquid mana, he discovered that it was really made of both white and blue mana. And after purification, the blue mana also began to change color from blue to white. When the blue part turned yellow, the clone entered Tier 5. And when all the mana turned white, it also reached Tier 6. After gathering enough data, Edward finally checked the crystallized mana. As expected, it's purple in color, muttered Edward underneath his breath. The reason he predicted the color of crystallized mana was because of one of the manhwa that Solomon gave him. In of them called, The Beginning After the End, the concept of purifying mana was introduced. And the colors of purification were exactly the same with the exception that in that universe, the starting color of mana is not blue, but dark. And the next step after that is red, followed by orange and so on. And, slight spoiler for the manhwa if you ever plan to read it or do not read the light novel. In that universe, after the white purity mana, there is also the purple color which is also referred to as ether that only the protagonist acquired. Thinking about this, Edward's eyes lit up as he made a somewhat major discovery. By that logic, the crystallized mana is a less purified form of ether. As for the Philosopher's Stone, it should be a more purified form of it. Immediately, he quickly checked not only his magic core that was fused with a perfect Philosopher's Stone but also other ones. And as expected, they were made most of the purple while the rest was blue. Edward then became excited. From many novels he read from his past life, ether is either considered an advanced form of mana or magic power or better yet, the origin of magic. It is believed that it was the fifth element, the reason that magic or anything supernatural occurred in a world where the laws of physics governed. Although these novels might not necessarily be right as they were essentially different universes, however, they can also be used as reference. Additionally, there are minor pieces of evidence to support these theories. For example, why could the Philosopher's Stone, ether, breaks the strict laws of transmutation in both the magical world and when it comes to gate alchemy? Why did the stone allow wizards to break Gump's law of elemental transfiguration and produce food out of thin air? Why could it grant immortality and many more? All of these show that ether was extraordinary, and studying it might lead Edward to the path of discovering the essence of magic. He then looked at the stone in his hand and said, "From now on, you will be called Ether Stone." Although he has not completely verified whether the stone was truly ether, he was 80% sure of his conjecture. Now, all he could think about was how to further purify the giant ether stone that is used as the energy core of the floating city. Once accomplished, he will raise the grade of the floating city from a pseudo-tier 9 artifact to a pseudo-tier 10, and even more. Unfortunately, this problem was not so easy to deal with. Based on his calculation, it would take dozens of tier 6 using their divine flame and many years to purify it until it completely turns purple. So far, he was the only tier 6 arcanist in the Empire, and you count the other 3 that will reach this stage in a few years, that's only 4 of them. Unless he could find a way to create a divine flame using countless lesser tiers. That's a good idea, so let's put it on the agenda for now, muttered Edward. Then, he frowned. See, I don't like the name divine flame, plus using it could bring some trouble. Edward knew if some of these gods knew that mortals were using their technique to benefit themselves, they would not be able to accept it and try to kill them. That's how petty these things are after being completely turned insane because of absorbing faith over a long period. In that case, let's call it Arcane Flame. No, that's too basic and unoriginal. How about Flame of Arcana or Arcana Flame? Yes, that's much better. He then updated his library using this new name. Then, after creating an Arcana Flame of his own, he began to purify his mana. After calculating the time it would take him to reach tier 7, he nodded in satisfaction. He then shared his discovery with the other 3 while encouraging them to hurry and enter tier 6. Immediately afterward, Edward tried using the Arcana Flame to purify void energy. And as expected, the flame was instantly extinguished. Knowing this, he began to test other energies. The flame was very effective. Regrettably, Edward did discover that it was more efficient to purify mana and then convert it into other energies than to directly purify other energy, like solar energy. The only exception was cosmic energy from the universe. However, Edward's understanding and use of this energy are very low or basic. When testing the flame on soul energy, he also discovered that it could also be purified. With this method, it is possible to create better soul crystals, remove soul curses, and even increase the strength of the soul. With this method, it will be easier for arcanists to increase their soul and better control their mana, thus decreasing the time needed to reach higher tiers. Plus, Edward has yet to fathom other benefits that a pure soul will bring to arcanists as a whole. This flame can also purify bloodlines so that in the future, Fleur's research can be successful. The path of bloodline arcanist will undergo a great boom after he returned to the Empire. Finally, the purification can also be applied to aura, allowing Aura Master to also benefit. Not to mention other things like purifying magical herbs for potions, or ores for both magical artifacts and material development of technology. This world is truly my lucky break, muttered Edward, who was a little worried that he would use all his luck in this world. However, after thinking about it for a moment, he realized he was being a little too ridiculous. A lot of the benefit he received from this universe was because he was prepared and had extraordinary means. Another person who came here might not necessarily acquire as much benefit as him. In the end, it all depended on his ability, ideas, and ability to execute his plans. Alright, let's check the information that Dolus gave me. Chapter 245, Parallel Dimensions. After reviewing the information, Edward frowned deeply. From Dolus, he learned that the reason Yahweh started the war was that he wanted to kill all the other gods and absorb their divinity to become omnipresent and omnipotent. To become the most powerful god in the universe. The intervention of the Novad did not stop Yahweh's ambitions but made them even grander as he now had his gaze toward the multiverse. Furthermore, according to Dolus, he most likely has regained most of his strength by now. What truly caught Edward's attention was the fact that Dolus stated that Yahweh did not need to rely too heavily on the faith of this mortal world to regain his strength. At some point in the war, the Christian discovered another method of powering up, which is one of the reasons that he could still tie with both the Novads and the other pantheons besieging him in the final confrontation. As for what that method was, Dolus does not know, or he did not want to say. It seems that I cannot use the same tactic again. Edward planned to weaken Yahweh using the Christians of this world just like he did to Truth. Unfortunately, this method seemed invalid. In that case, I might have to do things the hard way. He did not mind as long as he was prepared. This would be a new experience for him. After that, Edward prepared for his next adventure. He created a clone for the sole purpose of meeting Flynn Carson, who was the librarian in the future. From what he remembered from the movie, Flynn was a very gifted young man who also enjoyed learning. As long as his moral views are properly guided at a young age, he will be a very talented and powerful arcanist. As for his magical talent, Edward was not worried. When it comes to talent, there are two types. One is the ability to sense, control, and produce mana. This kind of talent can be improved through potions. Another type of magical talent is intelligence, wisdom, or IQ. With it, it is easier for an arcanist's soul to increase, easier for them when doing research or coming up with ideas. Although intelligence can be increased through genetic engineering and other means, naturally intelligent people still have an advantage over others. Not to mention these methods also work for them. Flynn Carson is a very intelligent young man. So, once he becomes an arcanist, he will be a great asset to the Empire. Of course, Edward also has his selfish motive. One of the ways that he exerts control over the Empire is by having a teacher-like relationship with all the gifted young people, especially the ones from Hogwarts that he taught. Because of this, during the early rise of the Empire, he would go to all the magical schools to teach when he had time. Even the Bones School was not spared. So, he was prepared to use a similar method for Flynn. Not just Flynn. Emily Davenport from the second movie was also a brilliant mind, even better than Flynn. She can be put on the list. After making the clone and instructing it on its job, Edward began his next adventure, parallel dimensions or parallel universe travel. Before this, Edward has successfully traveled to parallel dimensions. However, this time, he was not going to use the floating city or any other aid. He wanted to achieve this with his own strength. With the knowledge he received from his wife Rowena, along with his study of spacetime in this universe, he was sure that he would succeed. So, after reviewing the spell that he created one last time, Edward placed countless shields to protect him before casting it. Arcane Rune Spell, Interdimensional Portal. A magic circle appeared on the ground before a transparent door appeared in front of him. After checking it one last time, Edward entered. Earth 234, a circular crack appeared on a corner of a small deserted alley and a body dropped on the floor before the crack immediately closed. The body was missing one arm and one leg while passing out. It was Edward. Not long afterward, a homeless man with pale skin appeared in the alley to see the person lying on the floor. After seeing the clothes on his body, he immediately thought of robbing him. However, the moment he touched the body, a flame instantly incinerated him until there was nothing left. Not long afterward, a young woman with red hair appeared in the alley. She was shocked after seeing the body and rushed to check on it. She was surprised by all the fresh scars that looked like swords. And oddly, she was not burned like the previous person. The first instinct of the red-hair girl was to bring this person to the hospital after realizing that he was still breathing. However, she noticed the white flame that appeared on the wounds and slowly healed them. So, after hesitating for a moment, he decided to bring it back to her house. A few hours later, Edward opened his eyes. "Where am I?" He looked in the surrounding. However, everything was a little blurred. "You're awake," said the red-haired girl. "You're the one who saved me?" "Thank you." Then Edward's eyebrow furrowed, showing that he was slightly in pain. The reason for that is that he instinctively tried to use legilimency to read the girl's mind and he was slightly backlash. "It seems that my soul might be injured." After checking, he found that his soul was perfectly fine, just a little shaking thus affecting his mind and will making it difficult for him to cast spells currently. "My name is Edward Bones. I'm Chloe." "Chloe, a great name. I'm in your debt." "There is no need. I can tell that even without me, you would be fine," replied Chloe in awe of the white flame that was slowly regrowing limbs. She has never seen this kind of witchcraft before. "Plus, as a fellow witches, we should help one another." Edward's eyes lit up after hearing this as he learned that this woman was capable of using magic. If he was in his normal state, he would have long discovered this fact. After focusing on her face, he discovered that she seemed familiar. Unfortunately, his mind was not currently working properly. "Chloe, by any chance, you would not happen to have any herbs or books related to them, F.E.C. All the magical artifacts he had on him were destroyed except for his robe. That also includes his interdimensional ring." Edward did not care that much for the ring as it only made it easier to access the pocket dimension it was connected to. As long as he can cast spells, Edward can still gain access to all the things inside. "I do," replied Chloe, wondering what this warlock was planning. With curiosity, she led him to her garden while also taking all her books on herbology and potions. For some reason, Chloe instinctively trusted Edward. She did not know that this was the manifestation of her intuition as a dreamwalker, and a natural charm released by Edward's body to protect him during his time of weakness. After taking the books, Edward read all of them one by one. It took him a great deal of concentration to finish all of them in just 5 hours. After that, he took a bite out of all the plants. He activated the nanomachines inside to quickly analyze the effect of some of these herbs. In his state, it was a little difficult to connect to Morgana. Once he was done, he quickly formulated a potion to soothe the situation of his soul. As long as he can cast spells again, the healing process of his injuries will be accelerated. In his state, he could not brew a potion, so he had to order Chloe to do it based on his instruction. It only took her 3 tries before succeeding, showing that she had a great talent for potions. After all, this was a completely different system that she had never come into contact with. Succeeding after so few trials was more than excellent. Without hesitation, Edward drank the potion. He felt a cool sensation inside his head for a few minutes before vanishing. When he opened his eyes, his vision was no longer so blurry. Nor his was mind in chaos. After taking a deep look at Chloe, he immediately recognized her. She was the heroine of the movie, The Last Witch Hunter. Chapter 246, Choose. After knowing what world he was in, Edward was both disappointed and happy at the same time. Disappointed that this world seemed to be a low-level one, while happy that there was nobody like truth. Nevertheless, he did not focus on this too much. The recent experience made him discover a problem. As long as his soul or mind is affected, it becomes very difficult for him to cast spells. This was a flaw that could be fatal given the right circumstances. Immediately, Edward thought of designing a biochip to implant in his brain. In case something goes wrong, he can use it to function or use magic. Plus, he could use the second brain tactic he used in the Full Metal Alchemist universe. With a second brain connected to a small pocket dimension, in case something went wrong, it could be used in an emergency. After making a preliminary solution, Edward was prepared to heal his injuries. In his current state, it will take a few weeks for his soul to return to normal, and his phoenix flame will also take some time to regrow his limbs and heal all his injuries. He looked at Chloe and asked, "Do you have an empty room?" "I have a guest room available." "No, I mean a room that can be used for storage and so on." "No. What about an open space? It does not have to be big." Chloe nodded before leading Edward to a small backyard in her house. Edward looked at it for a moment, then the ground started to move and transform. From the earth a small house was made. "What kind of spell is that?" asked Chloe. "Matter manipulation," replied Edward. He was not lying. This was the term used to differentiate between transmutation made using magic and the ones accomplished through gate alchemy. As for the reason Edward used matter manipulation instead of transmutation, it was because the former was less taxing on his current self. He walked to the small brick house and cast the extension charm on it before entering. As Chloe followed him, she was surprised to see how vast the space was. "It's bigger on the inside, just like the TARDIS." "Exactly," replied Edward. As he walked inside, the environment began to change. 2 rooms were created, one was empty while the other was essentially a laboratory mostly with equipment to make potions. Using the earth, Edward was able to transform then into the metals he wanted before shaping it into the required items. Chloe was fascinated by what she saw. Not to mention she never witnessed such a spell, she had never seen a witch cast spell so fast without any chance or preparations. Meanwhile, Edward walked to the empty room and cast another spell. A portal appeared inside and many things slowly descended from it. Most of them were potions with other magical herbs. This portal was connected to the pocket dimensions where he stored all his things. Previously, he could get them out instant using his ring, but now he had to do things the hard way. Edward then looked at Chloe and said, "Come to see me in a week. Then, I will repay your kindness for saving me FRE. She nodded her head before leaving the small house, somewhat in a daze. Then, she remembered that this stranger that she brought into her home was missing an and a leg, and yet, he could walk perfectly fine. After thinking about it for a moment, she realized that he was floating the entire time, with his feet a few centimeters from the ground. Flying spell? By now, she was little immune to the shock, so she sighed and left. She still had to open her bar and make money to support herself. Meanwhile, inside, Edward used potions and herbs to heal his injuries. The scars on his body could be considered space slashes. If it was not because of his powerful body and the protection of his aura, he would have been split into countless pieces. All of this was because his spell went wrong. Previously, Edward used his gate to travel to parallel dimensions. However, the way the gate functioned was to use space-time energy to make a hole in the very fabric of reality to jump into another, to travel from one time and space to another. After so many years of studying, the best theory he can come up with to explain the situation was that time was like a river with countless branches. Each branch led to another space-time, reality, or dimension. As such, when he tried to travel to a parallel universe on his own, he always failed because his understanding and control of space-time energy were insufficient to jump from one branch to another. However, after studying the technology of the Novad, he discovered an alternative way. First travel to the blank realm, then lock on parallel dimensions through the frequency that they emanated before opening a breach there. Unfortunately, he underestimated how dangerous the blank realm was. When he was opening the breach to Earth 234, the spell he cast went out of control because of turbulence in the realm. A powerful spatial temporal vortex hit, almost killing. Luckily, he acted in time to separate and block the temporal energy of the vortex, while protecting himself from the spatial one. As such, his body was cut off instead of aging into an old man, reverting to a small sperm, or being erased by time. Before this, he made countless simulations with Morgana and used clones to test out. Unfortunately, the knowledge or data he gathered about the blank realm was proven insufficient, resulting in his spell going wrong. Of course, Edward was not worried about his safety. If something truly went wrong, the floating city would activate to save him. Despite this experience, Edward was very happy as he learned plenty of things. He recorded a lot of data in the vortex so that his understanding of spacetime energy will benefit greatly. Sometimes, personally gathering data or experiencing some things is more efficient than doing it remotely or through tools. So, he was confident that the next time he casts this spell, it should work. After mulling over his situation for a moment, Edward began to refine potions to remove spatial energy on his body, regrow his limb and soothe his soul. The entire process took 3 days. After that, he returned to his occupation as a thief, stealing knowledge from witches and warlocks of this world. At some point, Edward realized that he might have developed a bad habit of stealing books. Well, it is normal for a powerful person who essentially has everything he wants to develop some weird habits. Anyway, all geniuses were weird. 4 days later, he left the small house where he saw Chloe waiting for him. With a smile, he invited her in. She was surprised to find that the house was even larger than before with even more rooms. This spell can single-handedly solve the world's housing crisis and even alleviate the overpopulation problem, commented Chloe. I know. In the Empire, the extension charm is not used this way. That's because there is no issue with housing or overpopulation. Truth be told, there is a lack of population. Technology has developed too fast for the overall population to keep up. This is the reason that although the solar system is part of the Empire, most of the planets have only a few cities, leaving most of them to be underdeveloped. This is the reason that Edward wanted to take Earth 125's population, and if possible, a few others as well. Chloe was soon brought into a large room that was divided into two. One side was a library full of books, while on the other was a room full of gold, jewels, and diamonds. To repay your kindness, I will give you 2 options, said Edward calmly. Option 1 is wealth. If you choose it, you can have all of this gold and more. I can even process them for you into cash, a Swiss bank account, or stocks in all the top companies in this world. With this choice, you will instantly become the richest person on this planet. Option 2 is knowledge, things you could never fathom in your existence. If you choose option 2, you will become the most powerful witch that ever existed, even more powerful than the Witch Queen. So, make a choice. Chloe was shocked by the 2 options, however, she quickly shook her head. I do not want either of these. I want you. Unfortunately, I'm not for sale, said Edward with a smile. No, what I mean is that I want you to teach me. She was a smart person and guessed that this person might be one of the strongest warlocks ever in existence. As such, having him as a teacher was far more rewarding than anything else. Edward smiled and nodded. If she chose the second option, he would still teach her. As a dreamwalker, Chloe had a very special talent and she would be of great value to him and the Empire once she becomes a powerful arcanist. Of course, if she chose the first option, he would not place so much emphasis on her. A person who can choose wealth over knowledge would never go far in the magical path. This was just a little test. Alright, we will begin immediately. Wait, what would have happened if I chose the first one? Then, you would have a very wealthy witch. Chloe was a little surprised after hearing this. She thought that it was some test of character and if she chose wealth over knowledge, she would have gotten nothing. Nevertheless, she did not regret her choice. Some things were more important than money. Chapter 247, Conquest. Before everything else, I will tell you my origin so that you can better prepare and understand what you're getting yourself into, said Edward as he waved his hand to display 2 planets Earth in the air. I came from a parallel universe. Interdimensional travel, asked Chloe. Yes. Edward liked the fact that communicating with modern people was much easier to explain many things. Is this the reason you're so powerful? Could it be in that parallel world, our witches have developed magic to such an extent, asked Chloe with a little excitement in her voice. One of the main reasons that she wanted to learn from Edward was because she was always scared of her power, afraid to use it after accidentally injuring her brother one day. However, she believed that maybe with the guidance of such a powerful person, maybe she could master her gift. No, replied Edward. In that world, magic has essentially become extinct. However, there are gods like Anubis and Zeus that once existed there. The artifacts that these beings left are the only proof of magic left. Chloe then looked at him with puzzlement. The universe is vast, with an unknown number of galaxies. And you take into account the multiverse, it is indeed infinite, said Edward as he waved his hand to show a holographic image of the universe. It seems to expand infinitely to display the vastness of the cosmos. For Chloe, this was a beautiful experience. It was like she was traveling throughout the universe experiencing the birth and destruction of countless stars, solar systems, galaxies, and many other cosmic wonders. Thinking about how small she was compared to the cosmos, a small existential crisis overcame her. Now, imagine that universe was a giant egg floating in nothingness. After saying that, Chloe found herself floating in a white space with something that looked like an egg made of crystal. What is that nothingness? And what else exists in it? Other universes, she mumbled. Exactly, and that's where I'm from, replied Edward as he took Chloe to travel in the white space to another egg and enter. The world I'm from was similar to yours. Magic was weakened while technology was rapidly developing. The tension between the magical and non-magical was growing each year. I did not like this, so I changed the world. United the two sides and integrated the advantage of both magic and technology. Chloe then witnessed a brief history lesson about the Empire. She watched as it grew from a backward place without even the internet to an interstellar empire. Oh. She took a moment to process all the information she just received, then a frown appeared on her face. If you have any questions, you can ask. She hesitated for a moment before saying, it's not that I don't trust your words, however, there are some odd things or inconsistencies that I noticed. Oh, like what? The development of the Arcane Empire was too fast. In less than 100 years, it develops from the pre-information age to the interstellar age. That seems a little far-fetched even with magic. Good question. The answer to that can be divided into 3 main parts: advanced intelligence, unrestrained experiments, and knowledge from the future, with the last one being the main. Chloe frowned. I still don't understand. Edward waved his hand and a mirror appeared in front of her. Then, he cast a spell. Chloe immediately saw that her youthful face rapidly began to age, and in just a few seconds, she turned into an old woman. She caressed her face for a moment before taking out her phone and looking at it again. Please turn me back. Edward snapped his finger and she returned to her youth. With time magic, I was able to acquire future technology for the growth of the Empire. Unfortunately, messing with time is dangerous in any world, so I was a little restricted on how further in the future I could go. However, I managed to bypass this restriction by traveling to parallel dimensions where Earth was in the future. By stealing those timelines' technology, the development of the Empire was further accelerated. Furthermore, when a quick result is needed for some important discoveries, I would allow people to work in rooms with time acceleration. Dozens of years could pass inside while only a few months passed outside. Edward sighed as he reminisced about the early days of the Empire. It's a shame that traveling to parallel dimensions back then relied purely on luck, so he could not always find future timelines. Fortunately, things were different now. In that case, what about the other reasons you mentioned? Asked Chloe. By intelligence, I mean that literally. There are artifacts in my world that can make individuals more intelligent. I made sure to make them used widespread to help develop all fields of both magic and technology. Additionally, with genetic engineering, increasing the intelligence of the overall population was easier. Currently, the average IQ of the Empire is between 200 and 235, and it's rapidly growing. Chloe was once again surprised by this statistic. The average IQ score on Earth is between 85 to 115. Such a large disparity made her a little uncomfortable for some reason. As for the last reason, it's just as stated. Human experiments are very prevalent in the Empire and have greatly contributed to its development. Of course, we most use clones and animals. After saying this, Edward waited for her to process this information as he knew that not everyone was alright with this kind of thing. Aren't clones real people? Yes, they are, replied Edward. In this world, there is nothing perfect. To ensure that the Empire develop rapidly, for my own benefit, I made the choice to sacrifice them. The moment Edward learned that clones had souls, he knew that they were considered humans or living. Nevertheless, he still made the choice to treat them as such. His decision has resulted in clones being treated as nothing but commodities in the Empire. The sins of all these lives were on his head, but he did not regret his decision. Do I have to experiment on people too? Asked Chloe after a few seconds of pondering. It depends on your choice. After pondering for a moment, she sighed and decided not to think too much about this issue. As long as she was not required to do so, it was alright for now. Why are you telling me all of this? Chloe thought that she would just be taught magic, however, instead, Edward taught her all about his origin and so on. So, there must be a reason. The main reason is that I want you to understand how vast the universe is and for you to understand the potential of magic. I want to instill in you a sense of wonder, the desire for pursuing the truth, to discover the unknown. What Edward was doing was essentially the same thing that the Ancient One did to Strange when he first went to Carmitage. Otherwise, he could have just directly planted the information about the Empire inside her mind. As for the secondary reason, it's to prepare you. For what? Edward paused for a moment before saying, after mulling it over, I have decided to conquer this dimension and plunder its population. Chloe took a small step back after hearing this, however, Edward continued, this earth is full of people with magical talents. Although the majority of witches and warlocks are weaker than most wizards' children back in the Empire, that's only because there are no systemic training methods. After they are transported back to my universe and attend school, many powerful arcanists will be born. Of course, I will not only take the witches but also the regular people. This world has a decent population of magically gifted individuals, even higher than the Harry Potter universe before Edward established the Empire. Additionally, many muggles have witch bloodlines that are not activated because of the long intermarriage between witches and muggles. Not to mention that there are squibs in this world too, just like Dolan 37th. All of these people are possible arcanists once they arrived in the Empire. Chloe had a hard time processing the information she just received. With what she learned about the so-called Arcane Empire, she knew that there was no way for the Earth to defend itself against such an invasion. Do you have to do this? She asked. Yes. However, I can promise you that not a single drop of blood will be shed. Chloe was silent, not knowing what she was thinking. I can give you a few days to think things over. If you still choose for me to be your teacher, come see me. If not, I will leave the library for you. Underscore. Chapter 248, Earth 234. A few days later, Chloe once again came to the small house in the middle of her backyard. This time, she saw Edward, who was waiting for her. So, have you made a decision? Yes. I still want you to teach me. Oh, I thought you would refuse. In this world, Edward had met a few people who have rejected his invitation, so he thought his luck in this department was relatively poor. After thinking about it, I realized that there was nothing I could do to stop you. Plus, your action is not necessarily a bad thing for the people of this world, especially us witches. Chloe knew the precarious situation of the magical community. Although they currently have a peace treaty with ordinary people, that is only temporary. Over time, magic is rapidly declining while technology is advancing, not to mention the growth of the population of non-magical people. If things stay like this, it is only a matter of time before the magical community is forcibly destroyed or slowly turned into obscurity. This is the reason that many witches want to revive the Witch Queen so that she can kill most of the humans on this planet and return to the age when witches ruled the planet. Although Chloe was not one of these radicals, she also did not want her fellow brothers and sisters to become weak and irrelevant, to constantly live in fear of someone like Calder. Very well, replied Edward. In that case, let's begin. Chloe then followed him inside. So, what spell are you going to teach me first? Flying? Fireball? Or something else? None of these. You're going to exercise. Exercise? As in running and lifting weight and so on? Yes. Are you kidding me? No, I'm not. According to my observation, you witches are similar to wizards in my universe before I came along. Magic comes from your blood. However, unlike us, you do not have magic cores. Mana or magic power is not concentrated in one place but scattered in the blood, making it more difficult to control and reduce the amount available. This is the reason that most of you are on Tier 0 apprentices and even your Witch Queen is nothing but Tier 3. This is also the reason that casting spells usually require long chant, casting materials, and ceremonies as aid. So, the first step in your training is to create your magic core. Unfortunately, I have discovered that the bodies of you witches are very weak compared to us wizards, so the process has a higher chance of failure. Wizards have naturally stronger bodies. Because of it, children can fall a dozen feet from the air while playing Quidditch and only have a few fractured bones. Wizards can be sent flying by spells and hitting walls and yet be intact. Some magic spell or cauldron can explode in their faces and still be alright. This is both because of magic immunity and enhanced stamina. However, the witches in this world do not have this natural enhancement. So, I need to exercise, said Chloe slowly. You don't have to worry that this will take a long time since I will use potions to assist you to shorten the process. According to Edward, the magic system of this world can be called witchcraft instead of magic because of how reliant it is on foreign aid. In general, it is of no use to him besides references. However, their potion system has its unique side. Unlike in the Empire where there is a division between magical and non-magical herbs, the witches in this world used all herbs for magical purposes. They have ways to process non-magical herbs to possess magical properties and effects. It was as if they enchanted the herbs to make them special. So, Edward was inspired by their system as he had a few ideas. However, he would let Snape do further research. There is a room inside with changing clothes and a vest. Put them on. There is an AI who will supervise your training. Chloe nodded her head before doing so. As soon as she placed the vest on, she heard a mechanical voice. Please proceed to the next room to do a 100 kilometers run. What? 100 kilometers? There is no need to worry. The vest will inject potions to help with fatigue and strengthen your muscles. However, before activating, you need to reach your limits first. Chloe gritted her teeth as she realized that this training was also training of her will. So, she no longer complained and proceeded to the next room. Meanwhile, next door, after receiving the message that Chloe has begun her training, Edward teleported away, and slowly walked to a room full of witches and warlocks. The Witch Council. Are you the one who imprisoned us here? Asked Glazer, the governess and high arbiter of the council. A while ago, all the council members received a notification of an emergency meeting. However, after arriving here, they realized that someone might have lured them here. What's more, no matter what they did, what spell they cast, they could not leave the meeting room. Yes, that's me. As soon as he said these words, one of the council members' eyes suddenly glowed as he began to chant something. Edward glanced at him and blood came out of his mouth, stopping his spell. Then, a terrifying pressure came from his body overwhelming everybody in the room. These people felt that it was hard to breathe, and even their thoughts seemed to slow down. This pressure was not the result of a spell, but Edward displayed a small part of his magic power. It was so vast that it created this situation. While all of them had fear on their faces, he looked at each of them before growing. He did not find the information he wanted from their minds regarding the Witch Lords. He walked towards Glazer before taking her necklace. She wanted to prevent him but the pressure on her intensified making it impossible for her to move. You know, you are quite the talented individual. I look forward to your future accomplishment in the Empire, said Edward. He was not lying. In this world, the witches and warlocks relied heavily on bloodline. Talent and future achievement are often decided by the strength of their bloodlines. However, Glazer, as a half-witch, broke this restriction by becoming of one of the most powerful witches in modern times. Not to mention how she also became the leader of the council, which shows that she is also very politically minded. So, once she is brought back to the Empire, her potential will be further unlocked and she can go far in the arcane path. Edward waved his hand and numerous white strings entered the mind of the council members. Then, basic memories and knowledge of the Empire were inserted inside their minds. It also includes the fact he will soon conquer Earth and bring the population. However, Edward hid the fact that he was from another universe. Once these people return to the Empire, they will also interact with other people, so it is very easy for people to discover that they are from other universes. And Edward knew that this information was too important to be leaked. Truth be told, he was planning on altering these people's minds to tell them that they were transported to another parallel universe. However, even this would cause problems. The reason is that Tier 10 universal gods need to travel to parallel universes before reaching Tier 11. So, the technology for parallel dimension travel is extremely valuable to the point that once some civilization or individual develops it, the gods will fight over it. So, Edward's plan was to alter these people's minds that they were from a planet that was similar to Earth when they are transported to the Empire. You can do whatever you want with this information, said Edward. Prepare beforehand, tell the human governments, organize a desperate fight, and so on. I don't care. But I also need you to use your power to spread the news to as many witches and warlocks as possible, otherwise, I will pay a visit to you personally. After saying that, Edward walked in front of the golem that guarded the prison. After briefly analyzing it, he shook his head in disappointment. There was nothing new to learn from it. In the Empire, golems were divided into different levels. The first level was sculpture golems. These were created after someone sculpted something like a statue, a sculpture, a doll, or anything similar, then use magic to bring them to life. cm. The second level was energy golem. These golems used energy as golems like mana or something else. Technology robots fall in that category. The third level was the low intelligence golem. These golems are the ones who have basic artificial intelligence or used a cloned soul for their spirit. They can cast low-level spells depending on the energy core they have. The fourth level was wisdom golem, who have real AI as their core or are made with powerful souls. The respective names of these golems are cyber golems or spirit golems. And they can be counted as intelligent species since they grow and evolve on their own. They are powerful casters because of their intelligence, and they are also great researchers. Because of the potential of these types of golems, they are severely monitored and restricted, especially the cyber ones, as they could cause potential catastrophe to humans and the Empire as a whole. This prison golem is nothing but a first-level one that used the necklace as an activation code. The only thing worth praising was the craftsmanship and the material used. After shaking his head, Edward opened the door to the imprison and entered. He did not spend much time there as he was only here to take away all these prisoners. The majority of them were unruly people who refused to follow the law and preached of witches' supremacy, and a lot of them are fanatics of the Witch Queen. So, Edward planned to treat them the same way he did the Death Eaters and become their lord. A lot of them are very powerful and can become his support or strength in the future. Chapter 249, Witch Lords. After taking away the prisoners of the prison, he waited a few hours before heading to his next destination. A meeting of the Axe and Cross organization. This was an organization that which the main protagonist of the movie, Calder, belongs. Inside a secret room, many of the leaders of this organization were having a meeting. What do you think of the Witch Council's information? A warlock even more powerful than the Witch Queen. I think it's all nonsense. Especially what they said about this Arkar Empire. How could such a thing be real? Indeed. This might the fantasy of these witches, a world where magic is more powerful than technology. Many people agreed with this sentiment. One of the leaders then looked at someone and asked, Calder, what do you think? The council has no purpose to lie about something as grave as this, said Calder. However, there are some issues. I went to the prison and all the prisoners are indeed missing. That part is real and this incident alone will have drastic ramifications. Indeed. What issues did you discover? After my investigation, I could not find a trace of magic. So, how did that warlock restrain all the council members before taking away all the prisoners? There was no trace of even a confrontation. Could they have used this as an excuse? Asked someone else. Are saying that they released the prisoners themselves? Just a thought. They have no motives to do so, added Calder. Most of the prisoners have a grudge with the council. If they were released, the first thing that many of them would do is to seek revenge. Although what Calder said made sense, many people still had reservations about the council. This was simply because they did not trust magic and its people in general. You know, it's not very nice to label my existence as a joke. As soon as these words echoed in this meeting room, all eyes fixed on Edward, who was listening to them the entire time. All the people in the room were surprised as their magical detection items did not even detect Edward's presence. Adding to that the fact that he fit the description sent by the Witch Council, everyone quickly recognized him. However, Edward ignored all the gazes as he focused on Calder. Do you know anything about the other Witch Lords? He asked directly. Calder frowned after hearing this question. He was a very observant person, one of the many skills he acquired after living for 800 years. So, he could see that there was no fear in this person's eyes. As the infamous witch hunter in the magical community, no witches or warlocks did not fear him or have some awe for his power. Yet, he did not find anything. Additionally, he felt a great sense of danger from Edward, even more than when he faced the Witch Queen and killed her. It seems that you do not, said Edward. He had already gone into Calder's mind and searched for the information he wanted. And not just him, but all the members of this meeting. Edward then waved his hand and a portal appeared, and from that portal fell a still-beating heart. The moment that heart appeared, all the members of the Axe and Cross stood up as they recognized what it was. Meanwhile, Calder fell dizzy as memories hidden deep in his mind suddenly resurfaced. Then, he realized that the reason he was immortal was that the Witch Queen linked his life to the beating heart. As long as the heart was alive, he was immortal. At the same time, the Witch Queen can be brought back to life using it. After figuring this out, he did not hesitate to take out a small pistol he had secretly hidden since weapons were not allowed in this meeting. Bang! 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 FRE! Oh! To his dismay, the bullets seemed to be stopped in the air by an invisible force. Calder has seen magic shields before, but not one that was instant and did not require chance. Edward removed his gaze from the heart before looking at his attacker. The gun in the latter's hand suddenly flew over, then, Calder groaned in pain as he held his head before passing out. Edward knew that Calder was nothing but an ordinary person with long life. And his immortality was similar to Frank's. So, there was no value in studying him. Of course, he still had great use. With all his years of living honing his mind and will, with all his experience, once he returned to the Empire, he would make a great battle arcanist. Whether he decides to become an Auror which his skills were perfectly suited for or join the army, he will accomplish great things in the future. Ignoring all the people in this room, he instantly vanished. There were a few things that truly interest him in this world. One was the potion system which had its uniqueness. The second was the ancient weather runes that appeared at the beginning of the movie during the plane sequence. He was interested in how they were made and function. Finally, it was the witch lords mentioned in the movies. So far, only the witch queen appeared, however, she had a few other brothers and sisters. From the information gathered, Edward knew that magic may have originated from them through bloodline. So, he was interested in their origins. After leaving the meeting, he tracked down the owner of the ancient runes and borrowed them from her before returning home. It was still 6 months before the start of the plot where they ended up in Calder's hand. After entering his small house, he saw Chloe who had just gotten out of the shower and was drying her hair with a towel. "So, how was it?" "Painful," she replied with some resentment. "I am sure it was. Bear with it as it will only last 3 to 5 days. "I know. By the way, why do you have a beating heart in your hand?" "It belongs to the witch queen. I'm going to resurrect and dissect her," replied Edward calmly. Meanwhile, Chloe's mouth was wide open after hearing this. To all witches, the queen had always been a symbol of might, power, and terror. And yet, someone just said that they were going to treat her like a lab rat. Immediately afterward, she woke up and realized that the man in front of her was an existence even more terrifying than the witch queen. "Can I watch?" "If you want, but the process will be bloody and disgusting." After gritting her teeth, she still chose to watch. Edward then proceeded to revive the queen. The process required a sacrifice. However, after analyzing the method that Belial used in the movie, he knew that it only took 3 things: mana, life force, and a soul. The mana came from him and he used alchemy to take life force from the planet. As for the soul, he summoned a sinful one from the underworld. He made sure that it was a weak one that would not be noticed. Once the ceremony ended, the witch queen and her ugly face appeared in front of Edward and Chloe. However, she did not even have the opportunity to say anything before her consciousness blurred and she passed out. Finally, Edward had Morgana scan the general anatomy of the witch queen. The presence of the little purple-haired elf surprised Chloe at first, however, she was soon overtaken by her cuteness. The scan could only get a basic idea of the inside, so the dissection was needed to acquire the detail. So, Edward studied everything, from her skin, muscles, bones, organs, organ systems, blood, brain, neural pathway, cells, and so on. The entire process took a little over an hour. Based on fast and proficient he was, Chloe wondered how many of those he had done. Meanwhile, Edward was more focused on the findings as they caught his attention. The witch queen and maybe even the other witch lords can be considered a different species from humans. Their anatomy was different, especially their stomachs would digest anything and turn it into nutrients for their bodies. They did not have a magic core as their heart was used to store their mana. However, they also could not increase mana naturally. Instead, they can convert souls into mana. After learning this, Edward theorized that this was the reason that the witch lord liked to kill a large population of humans. It was not because they feared their growth as they claimed but to increase their power. Unfortunately, this ability of them has a terrible conservation rate. This is the reason that the witch queen is so weak despite causing the Black Death in Europe and absorbing so many souls. After analyzing the queen's bloodline, he discovered something that seems familiar. It was like an aura, an imprint, or a signature. He reviewed his memories to determine where he had noticed similar things. His eyes suddenly lit up as he remembered, it was the aura of the abyss. The blood of the witch queen had a similar imprint or signature as the demon that Hermione once summoned from the abyss plane. Could there be a connection between the two, thought Edward. Chapter 250, Dream. In many novels he has read, the abyss is present and prevalent, meaning that it stretches to countless universes. And since the presence or aura that the abyss creature emits is somewhat similar, there is a high probability that they are connected somehow. Or at the very least, there is a main abyss universe whose influence has spread to the omniverse, just like Merlin, Solomon, or even a place like Atlantis. Now, the question is whether this is the result of primordial Earth, or something else. After thinking about it for a moment, Edward decided not to think about such a thing for now as he was simply incapable of intervening in things on such a scale. He was nothing but a little tier 6 ant. In a world like this one, he can act all arrogant as he wants, but he also knew his place. Although he had potential that would take time to transfer into real strengths. Nevertheless, he was slightly interested in the abyss dimension of this universe and their connection to the witch lords. So, he began to search the mind, memories, and soul of the witch queen. She has lived for a very long time, so her memories took a little while to go through. However, Edward did find something. It was a memory of her and her other brothers and sisters taking place in a war before accidentally falling into a space crack with many other people. Only a few people survived, and after waking up, they found themselves on Earth. Because of the situation, the survivors banded together, meaning that the witch lords were not real siblings. Unfortunately, Edward was disappointed as he could not find any memories before that regarding the abyss except for that brief war where everything was blurry. After doing a little digging, he could tell that these memories were erased on purpose, and unfortunately, there was no way to get them back as the person who did it was thorough. It seems that I want to use the witch lords to find the coordinate of the abyss. I might have to rely on the others. Luckily for him, he knew where the others were sleeping from the Queen's mind, the Bermuda Triangle. Edward knew that there must be a reason that this place is abnormal in every iteration of Earth. He looked at Chloe and asked, "Are you alright? I took a few anatomy classes in college, so I'm alright." Although her complexion was a bit pale, she appeared to be fine as she said, "In the Empire, unless you are in the field of necromancy, body modifications, human or alien biology, it is not really required. However, as a dreamwalker, you will have to deal with the soul and mind." Chloe paused for a moment after hearing this. "You knew? You mean about your ability?" "Of course. I did not mean to hide it from you, it's just, you're scared of your ability. It is understandable. But I will teach you to control them properly." After talking to her, Edward teleported to the Bermuda Triangle to take the body of the other witch lords. Although they were more powerful than the Queen, they were still easily captured. Additionally, they had to seal themselves after a certain time to sustain their immortality, which in turn drastically decreased their strength. Unfortunately, Edward could not find the coordination to the abyss from their minds, making his voyage useless. Whoever or whatever erased these people's memory really wanted to remove their connection to the abyss. Or maybe, the abyss itself removed them. Nevertheless, he was still satisfied with learning their ability to convert soul into mana. Additionally, he had another plan to reach other dimensions through Chloe. So, after returning home, he supervised her training while studying the ancient weather runes that could manipulate rain, wind, cold, and heat. They were quite the interesting magical artifacts, most likely the most powerful in this world. They were created by the witch lords using an ancient language that they have long forgotten. To be precise, also erased from their memories. It appeared that the witch lords were very afraid of anything connected to the abyss. Maybe they were the ones who erased their memories. So, even after making these runes, they wanted to get rid of them. It was only because the person in charge of disposing of could not bear to and secretly held onto it. Then, at some point, it reached the witches' society. The witch lords even had rules that all of them could not stay on Earth at the same time in fear that their abyss aura would garner the attention of people there. The only exception was their sleeping place in Bermuda as it had some sealing effects. 3 days later, Chloe's physical training ended and Edward supervised the process of her forming her core. Her training did not consist of only physical training, but also mana control. So, when the time arrived, the process went smoothly. She controlled the mana that was scattered throughout her body and concentrated on her heart. Using the right method, she finally created a magic core. Chloe opened her eyes with joy on her face. "Lumos," she said as a ball of light appeared in her hand. Despite this charm is only the most rudimentary, she was happy. That's because previously, she would need a long chant of at least 3 seconds to cast a similar spell. "So, what tier am I in now?" she asked. "Still 0. Luckily for you, you do not have any limiters, so as long as your mana reaches a certain standard, you'll be considered tier 1. "Drink this," he said as he handed her a blood-red potion that looked ominous. "What is it?" she asked as she drank it. "Although your body produces mana like us wizards, however, the mana produced does not go to your core but to your body. Meaning that you have to constantly guide it to the core and waste a lot of unnecessary time. This potion will modify your magic veins so that the mana produced from your blood will automatically go to your core. Be warned though, the process is very painful." Edward has just finished saying these words when Chloe heard a cracking sound coming from her body, then, she screamed in pain as she fell to the ground. She started to wiggle as her body twisted in a position that was not possible for humans. If anyone saw her, they would think that she was one of those possessed people in those exorcist movies. The process only lasted a few minutes before stopping. As she breathed deeply on the ground, Chloe could not resist cursing. Why is everything related to magic so painful? This is the price paid for having rapid success. If you wanted to deal with this issue the normal way, you would have to undergo surgery to modify your magic veins, and spend weeks recuperating. Something tells me that you have a way to make it a lot less painful. "Maybe," said Edward as he shrugged his shoulder. "Pain is a way to temper the will. And the stronger the will, the easier it is to control mana and spells. Let's go, there is more pain coming." While walking away, a white light enveloped Chloe and she felt reinvigorated, her mind refreshed as if she had had a great sleep, and the ache in her body was gone. After entering the next room, she saw a white cabin with a blue liquid inside. The entire design of the cabin looks very futuristic. "What's this, WN new? CM. Virtual reality cabin. I need your help to experiment with dreams. However, your current ability is not nearly enough to help and I do not have the time to slowly teach you. So, I have to suffer again." "Yes. With this, you will be able to learn 7 years of knowledge in just 1 month, making you on par with most high school graduates in the Empire. However, every time you use the cabin, a massive headache will hit, almost making you want to die. Chloe looked at the cabin with gritted teeth, thinking about whether to get in. This is a rare opportunity. In the Empire, only honors children can enjoy such benefits. And of these people are geniuses among geniuses. Once they finish the program, they are considered the elites. All universities will send them invitations, and countless jobs and opportunities will be offered to them. As long as anyone can pass the honors program, their success in life was guaranteed. Edward was not telling the complete truth. The honors program had to learn 7 years of knowledge in 1 year, not a month. Of course, their course load was much higher than the one he prepared for Chloe, at least 10 times. Nevertheless, he wanted to push her limit to bring out her full potential. After hearing this, Chloe took a deep breath. From the general information she gathered from Edward, she knew how competitive the situation was in the Empire. This is a place where the word genius is too common. After all, so many people have IQs higher than 200. As such, she understood that only her unique talent might give her an advantage over some people. And now, she had the opportunity to be taught by the most powerful mind in the Empire. How could she not take this chance? So, she resolved herself for what was to come.